Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the 2023 ELAP Conference. I'm Jen McLaren, one of your conference co-chairs, and we are so glad you were here with us. If you were with us yesterday, you know it was full of awesome and inspiring presentations. If you missed it, we invite you to catch up at your convenience on the ELAP YouTube channel. Since this event only happens once in a blue moon, you don't want to miss any of it. There's a link to YouTube on our conference webpage as well as in the chat box here. We have just a few housekeeping things before we move on. You will notice that this platform is a little bit different than others you may have used. We're using Team Live to accommodate the large number of attendees. As an attendee, you can't unmute yourself or turn your camera on. Any questions you wish to pose to our presenters can be done through the Q&A chat box. We encourage you to put your name in the space provided. On your screen, you should see how to submit your questions via chat. During today's event, feel free to send in your questions throughout the morning at any time. We will pose questions to the presenters at the conclusion of their presentations. We also invite you to join in on the conversation on our Slack channel. We have already had some great conversations, engage with our presenters, and had a little extra to the virtual conference experience. There's a link to join Slack on the conference webpage, and we also have it available through a link in the chat box here. Today's theme is the Moonshot. Our Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, or LTAC for short, can seem a bit nebulous if you aren't familiar with them. After today, you will be well versed in their stratospheric projects and expansive knowledge. They've got their phasers set to stun, and we are here for it. We're going to launch right into our first presentation. Judy Morgan is VP and Chief Compliance Officer for PACE Analytical Services. With over 30 years in analytical testing and compliance, she provides the necessary leadership to oversee a strong corporate compliance program that includes quality assurance, EH&S and sustainability, international standards, government relations, and ethics and confidentiality. Well known to the industry, she is a respected expert witness, formerly a registered lobbyist, and has analytical experience in both organic and inorganic analyses. Her experience and dedication to the testing industry has allowed her to apply her technical expertise as an active member for multiple national and federal committees and organizations such as TNI, ASIL, CTAC, A2LA, and EPA. She has received high honors, including the Preston Millar Award and the esteemed Charlie Carter Award. Please welcome Judy.
Thank you for the great introduction, and good morning and welcome to all. Welcome to the third annual ELAP Conference, and I'm excited to be presenting here today. As introduced by Jennifer, I am Judy Morgan, VP and Chief Compliance Officer for PACE Analytical. I'm also the current chair of the California Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, also known as ELTAC. And today we're going to talk about ELTAC, our mission, our accomplishments, and vision for 2023. Next slide, please. Starting with the mission, the ELTAC mission statement was updated in 2016 and focuses on three main areas. As you can see here, facilitation, guidance, and partnership are the three main areas. ELTAC is intended to provide a bridge to facilitate transparency and bring the lab community, the California agencies, and the data users together to exchange information. Secondly, we work to provide support, advice, expertise, and neutral guidance to ELAP on technical issues and potential regulatory impacts when changes are needed or proposed. And then thirdly, partnership. We partner with ELAP in working to create and maintain a high-quality accreditation program. One of our biggest strengths is our representation. So as you can see here, our members cover a wide range of environmentally responsible stakeholders. At this time, our voting members represent both public and private laboratories who provide information to meet environmental compliance needs for various members of the environmental stakeholder community. We do have a few vacancies, so we are looking to fill them for the current committee term. Recent term expirations and changes in stakeholder groups have resulted in opportunities to seek for new members. Aside from the voting members, we also have our non-voting members. They represent our agency partners and public interest. The various entities that we have here give opportunity for collaboration across many different areas of focus. This representation of both groups is one of many benefits of how ELTAC is structured. And while we are actively looking to fill our vacancies, we do have a current project with our ELAP partners. Next slide, please. So our current focus is a laboratory survey. And so while the ELTAC actions have been slow over the past couple of years, and with only a few projects that have been brought to the committee, the most recent area of interest is ELAP customer relations. And that involves a specific focus on the resources available to the lab community. Resources for this consideration can be people providing information or guidance information that's available via the ELAP website. ELAP is looking to understand how to improve outreach and successfully support the laboratory community for the initial and renewal application process. So the stated issue, as you can see, back up. The stated issue, the laboratory seems to be struggling with the application process and successfully gaining accreditation within the desired time frame. The solution is establish a working group focused on surveying the labs to get feedback on the ELAP accreditation services. And as you can see here, the team has tentatively identified three main areas of focus: the application process itself, proficiency testing, and the assessment process. The questions on the survey will be centered around these main focal points. The main goal is to identify the areas where additional clarification or resources can improve the overall experience. Anonymous response will be an option. The survey will be distributed using an appropriate platform such as SurveyMonkey. All accredited laboratories will be included, and then beta testing will occur prior to the official distribution. So ideally, we want to make sure that we ask the right questions and provide the actual survey itself in a format where we can most successfully gather the desired information in order to improve the process and get some good conversations started. Next slide, please. So our current status with LTAC, we find that engagement has begun to decrease over the past couple of years. This could be for several reasons, and I would think possibly the maturity and stabilization of new programs and recent changes resulting in fewer areas requiring our input could be one of the reasons. Uh, Lack of overall engagement due to reduced face-to-face meetings. I think the virtual meetings have been great, but I think face-to-face brings more people together. And then possibly a need to reassess how we engage with the community. And as you can see on the slide, this from a service perspective, we're not being utilized in a manner that allows us to fully assist the lab and agency community. And so when there are no active topics or requests, meetings are not necessary or scheduled. We can have up to 3 meetings per year. And unfortunately, we haven't had enough agenda items in order to be able to have those meetings. And then from the standpoint of engagement, we may need to reassess the needs of the stakeholder community and shift the approach. Next slide, please. So while we're in the process of filling a few vacancies on the current committee, our capabilities and capacity to assist is still strong. A quick overview of the benefit and the value of LTAC is represented here. So our expertise, of course, representing regulatory understanding and expert knowledge in the key industry areas is a huge plus. We're bringing in the ideas and opinions from multiple different places. The willingness to assist, of course, this is a voluntary committee. Our goal is to meet and exceed the needs as they are brought to us. Stakeholders, we represent a broad cross-section of labs, regulators, and data users, and of course, encourage collaboration among all of the entities. And then focus, investing to perpetuate dynamic communication between all of the parties, and then provide an opportunity to bring all of the parties together as a community. The goal of LTAC is to be a service, and our idea now is to potentially look to refocus. Next slide, please. So with this decline in engagement, I think refocusing is probably a good consideration. So LTAC has been instrumental in providing solutions to many issues over the years. In many instances, it has been actively engaged in the directions for change. And now we have come to a place where maybe we need to look at what our future is. We're underutilized, so we need to determine how to effectively increase engagement, take a more proactive approach to current issues, and get them brought forward to us. And sometimes it's LTAC that may have issues that we can bring. Sometimes it may be the regulatory community that can bring issues to us. Nevertheless, periodic outreach to the labs and the agencies may be something we want to increase. Becoming a voice to bring the concerns forward for the lab community could also be an option. So there's multiple ways that we can improve and increase the direction of LTAC and involve the community in a more dynamic way. So some potential ideas are on the next slide. In my opinion, the mission statement is still valid, but how we meet the needs may require a different approach. Some ideas and thoughts are represented here. So a standing agenda with information that encourages idea sharing for future developments. One of the things that the laboratory community has always been engaged in is new technologies, new innovations, new things that may need to be regulated, new regulations that are on the horizon, things that are going on within the EPA, with whether it be regional or at the federal level, as well as changes in the technology. So improving technology and being able to get lower detection limits or detect more compounds or even introduce new instrumentation. Those are the kinds of things that the laboratories always seem to have in their forethought. So, bringing those things forward to the regulators so that they know that, where the industry is going, I feel like could be a potential agenda item that would be helpful for discussion. In addition to that, there's other things with data usability, changes in how data is reported, other things that could also be brought forward in the form of knowledge sharing. So finding ways to share knowledge and create a platform for any stakeholder to provide informational presentations to bring the lab, the agency, and the data users together. So this isn't just laboratories bringing this forward. This would be any stakeholder entity. So to allow them to get on the agenda and bring information to the group. So it could be anything from new methods, new compound lists, new analytes that are potential chemicals of concern, technology. It could be a wide variety of things because the most important thing from a knowledge perspective is understanding that there are different viewpoints coming from whether you're regulated or whether you're the regulator. And so if you can bring those communities together before changes are made or to help put changes in place, then the level of success only goes up from there. So from a service perspective, working with the stakeholders to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the community and consistently evaluate the effectiveness of our actions is another piece to this. So, when you look at LTAC, or at least when I look at it right now, I say to myself, are we being effective? We're available. We have the right people. We have openings to expand, and add more people. But are we being effective? I don't know that we can measure that, but I can measure engagement. And right now, engagement has decreased. So, while that could be a good thing in some respects, from the standpoint of there's nothing controversial going on, it can be looked at in another way that maybe the communities don't know that they can bring the ideas together, or maybe don't realize that a platform exists for that. So I kind of want to give that my 30-second plug for that, and to let the community know that, we're looking more at an ideas and thoughts dynamic relationship process so that we can exchange information more effectively. I realize that I've kind of shortened this presentation, so it's taken me only just a few minutes to get through this, but I would like to open it up for any kind of questions or comments. And I want to thank everybody for taking a moment to listen.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy. And like she mentioned, she does have a few minutes for questions. So we'll give you all just a second to type those in. I know it can take just a minute to get those in. So we'll let you do that. Was someone asking, have you been on the technical advisory committee in any other states?
I have actually, I served on a special committee, yes, for the state of Minnesota.
And we love your accent, so I know. Judy's in Tennessee, in case you can't tell. We love it. And how do their technical committees work, and do they work the same way that you're suggesting?
Well, this one, the one in particular was government appointed. So it was appointed from the standpoint of accreditation. So this has been many years ago. And yet it did work very similar. There was, some very specific things that the committee was charged with, so to speak, to develop and create some ideas around the accreditation program there. And but it wasn't an ongoing committee. So it disbanded once the initial need had been met.
And do you have any information about when the recruitment for the open LTAC positions will happen?
I don't. I don't know that the timeline on that.
Chris Hand, I think, is typing. But basically, yeah, if you're interested, please get in touch with ELAP, and we will get you in touch with the information and let you know about that. And how many members normally participate in LTAC? I think
Oh, that's a good question. What is the
I would
maximum?
have to. Probably, I was like, I think it's 10.
I
Is that
think it's
right, Ken?
10.
Yeah,
That's
that's
correct.
what feels right to me. Okay.
It's 10 voting members, 10 members of the laboratory community.
Yeah. So I was sitting here and I was thinking, oh, we've got 4 vacancies. We have 6 people. I'm thinking, oh, it's got to be 10.
What do you see in the differences in California labs on how we do business compared to other states?
I'm going to go right down the middle of the road on that. I think every state has its challenges. And I think over the years, and I've seen this kind of ebb and flow with the different states where, a state will have a very strong program and everything will kind of move along. And then something will happen. I know COVID, changed a lot of things for a lot of not just state agencies, but for laboratories as well, and affected the job market. It affected the path that we were all on and kind of interrupted it. So there's been a lot of agencies that have had to kind of step back and reevaluate their staff and bring more staff on. And in the process, some of those states have actually moved over to third party accreditation and allowing for third party assessment, so that's probably one of the biggest trends that I've seen, is allowing for the third party accreditation. But truthfully, I think every agency that remains engaged with the laboratory community has the opportunity um, to improve their program, and they're taking those opportunities via outreach.
Awesome. And then there's a question saying, oh, sorry, just my screen just flipped over. What are some of the plans for improving engagement?
Well, I think it's going to be limited to what we're allowed to do as a committee. So it's going to, we're going to have to collaborate with our agency partners and understand what kind of things we can do. Whether it be through surveys or whatever we can put out there to get the attention of the communities and bring their information to us. So it's going to be a matter of what mechanisms are available to us.
And what is one takeaway our California labs can do to be more engaged and help elevate our lab community in California?
To help what?
Elevate our lab community in California.
I think it's strong engagement with the agency itself. So ELAP and the laboratories working together. One of the things that I have found over my career is the stronger relationship that I have with my regulator, the better circumstance that I have for both compliance and for understanding. So, I know it's hard sometimes to know how to approach, agency regulators, or how to approach the right people to understand something. But, it's the thing that I have found is that majority of the time the agency is truly there to help and wants to help the laboratories. So I feel like engagement, just a two-way engagement, is probably the best advice.
Perfect. And then what has been the most challenging part of LTAC?
Probably for me, I'm a very last minute communication type person. So if I think of something I want to communicate, and probably the constraints, that we have being governed by the Bagley-Keene Act has probably been the hardest thing. But from the standpoint of just the virtual piece of it and the the outreach, not being able to reach out the way we want to has probably been the hardest thing. I feel like there's a lot of expertise and there's a lot of things we can do. We've just got to figure out a more dynamic way to communicate.
And I think this will be our last one. Has LTAC seen a need for an agenda item related to the 2021 method update rule to support labs during this transition?
I don't believe that anybody has really come to us and asked anything about that. However, there are a number of us on the committee, including myself, that has been involved with putting presentations together for that. I mean, it is absolutely something that we can do. We certainly have the people to do it and the expertise to do it. It's just a matter of the level of interest. So definitely something I'm going to write down, as being an interest of the community, because we can absolutely provide information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Judy. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. At this time, we're going to go ahead and move on, and we appreciate your insight into LTAC's future. As a little preview, the rest of our presenters will have graciously provided behind-the-scenes looks at their laboratories, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Up next, and the current frontrunner for the best presentation title, as determined by me, is Augustin Pieri. Dr. Pieri obtained his BS in chemistry from the University of Southern California and his PhD in chemistry from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he worked on synthesizing photoactive pharmaceuticals and nanocarriers. He has authored many scientific publications and has given numerous presentations at technical meetings on topics ranging from inorganic photochemistry to environmental analytical chemistry. At WEC Labs, he has worked as a bench chemist in all sections of the laboratory, which includes microbiology, inorganics, and organics. Additionally, he has extensive experience developing and validating methods for emerging contaminants by sophisticated techniques such as LCMSMS, GCMSMS, and ICP-MS. Since becoming the laboratory technical director in 2016, he continues to be active in developing methods for novel contaminants, as well as modernizing legacy analytical methods to lower detection limits and improve data quality. Please welcome Augustin.
Thanks, Jen, for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for tuning in this morning. And also thanks to ELAP for putting this together and asking me to speak here. This is great. So yeah, my name is Augustine. I'm the technical director at WEC Labs, and I was going to talk today about PFAS. I was going to do it, and my title is PFAS and Furious. I was going to do it in kind of the theme of Fast and Furious, but I wasn't going to subject everybody to my absolutely horrible Vin Diesel impersonation. The voice would have been bad news for all 30 or 40 minutes or whatever we have. But I did ask the AI to generate some images of what Fast and Furious would look like in a lab. Can you get the next slide, please? And I thought it'd be pretty cool, but the voice would have been too much. I would have had to say jokes like I don't got QCs, I got family, or things like that, which would not have been good, because PFAS, actually, the methods in general, have a ton of QCs. We run more QCs for this method than any other method. I think we run probably like 1.5 or 1.7 QC samples for every field sample we run for PFAS. So just wanted to work. So I'll do it straight from the perspective of a commercial analytical lab. So I want to give a little bit of feedback, a little bit of background on our laboratory, kind of give an overview of what we do here. So we're a full service environmental lab. We have a pretty big list of FOAs, where we do a little bit of everything. There are a few things that we don't do, but our scope kind of expands from all the regulated contaminants, things in inorganics, microbiology. We do some radiochem, metals, a little bit of everything. We've also historically been involved in persistent organic pollutants, things like the chlorinated, dioxins and furans, PCBs, organochlorine pesticides, that kind of stuff. And historically, we've always tried at least to be on the forefront of emerging contaminants. So this goes way back. We've always kind of looked towards that. Things like Chrome-6, when that was a big deal out here, when Ambrokovich came out and everybody was worried about Chrome-6. We were working on that. We were doing a lot of the development early for PPCPs in our lab, so pharmaceuticals and personal care products for like water reuse and things like that are kind of a big deal in California. And then more recently, PFAS, which I don't know if you can even call PFAS emerging contaminants anymore. I feel like they're fully emerged and everybody's talking about it and everybody's worried about it. But in our lab, we actually started running PFAS analysis back in 2007. So it was the first method that I developed out of undergrad. In those days, it was just for PFOA and PFOS. It was an article that came out, said, hey, these compounds look to be pretty recalcitrant. They seem to be commonly found. Not a lot of people were looking for them, so we developed a method, offered it, for a couple of years, and there was a little bit of traction, but not too many people were worried about it, and that obviously changed in recent years, and now it's a huge deal, and everybody's worried about PFAS, and so much so that the EPA has even put out regulations, proposed regulations, the first change to the primary drinking water standards in decades, which is kind of a big deal. And as I can imagine, EPA doesn't do this all willy-nilly, and they haven't done this recently. So people have a lot to say. So I think in March 28th or something, the EPA put out a set of documents, outlining its proposed changes for regulating PFAS in drinking water. And because it's the first change in a long time, people have a lot to say. I think the comment period closed either yesterday or closes today, but as of a couple days ago, they've received 61,000 comments to these proposed guidelines. So it's a big deal. People are worried about it. People have a lot to say, and I think it's something that's never probably ever gonna go away. So I'll talk a little bit about these proposed guidelines, what we're doing in California, and some of the methods that we have for PFAS analysis. So the EPA is proposing to regulate 6 PFAS targets, right? PFOA, PFOS, HFPODA, which is also known as Gen X, PFHXS, PFNA, and PFBS. Now, what they're doing is they're setting MCL levels, proposing MCL levels at 4 ppt for PFOA and PFOS, and 1 for the other 4 compounds. Now, that's not a concentration. That's actually a hazard index, which I'll talk about a little bit later in more detail. So the EPA also, since we're in full swing of UCMR right now, and they have a lot of data from a lot of labs on what's achievable, they've also set something called a PQL, a practical quantitation limit. Now, these are limits that the EPA thinks that most laboratories should be able to hit in a kind of regular setting in drinking water. And those limits range from 3 ppt for PFBS and PFHXS up to 5 for the Gen X compound. These are limits that the EPA is comfortable that most labs can hit and reliably measure down to. But they've also set something called a trigger level. A trigger level is a lower value, so it's about a third. It's actually a third of the PQL. And what they're doing is they're using that trigger level to mark the trigger point at which water systems will have to do either more or less monitoring. Now, if you have a sample that falls under that trigger level over some number of months or a year, I think it's a year rolling average, then you're able to do monitoring every 3 years. And if you're over that trigger level, I think the monitoring goes to quarterly or something like that. Now, the issue here is that almost all labs, I can't imagine any lab who couldn't hit the trigger level. So the PQL is artificially higher. I think most labs will be going to that trigger level at that low, 1 to 1.7 ppt range. I mean, that's what most labs are reporting anyway for PFAS compounds these days. So the hazard index for those 4 compounds, it's something that I didn't really understand, or I didn't know about. I had to read up on it when this first came out, but I guess it's a commonly used risk management approach for mixtures of chemicals. Now, the reason is that the EPA thinks that these chemicals, by themselves maybe aren't so bad, but altogether could have some kind of combining effects or something else that is bad news. So they're measuring it as a whole set of compounds. So the equation in this approach would be using ratios called hazard quotients. And these hazard quotients, HQs, are calculated for each of the 4 PFAS compounds in the HI, PFHXS, HFPODA, PFNA, and PFBS. By dividing an exposure metric, which in this case is the measured level of each of the 4 compounds in drinking water, by a health reference value for that particular PFAS compound. So for health reference values in this proposal, the EPA is using what's called a health-based water concentration. And these levels are 9 ppt for PFHXS, 10 for HFPODA, 10 for PFNA, and 2,000 for PFBS. So these individual ratios are summed across the mixture to get that HI. If that HI is greater than 1, then that's an MCL exceedance, and then there's indication that there's potential for health effects there. So an example would be, let's say a sample has has 8 ppt of PFHXS and PFNA, which are both under that HBWC, the health-based water concentration, for those compounds. But if you use this HQ ratio, you ratio them out and sum them together, you get a number that is actually over the MCL. So that's where this problem comes into effect, that your individual targets are below what they're saying are health-based levels, but combined could lead to some, problems down the line. So in California, we're no strangers to regulation, and we've actually had these regulations in place for some time now in drinking water. Now, the California regulations are a little bit different from the federal ones in that we're only looking at 4 compounds. So PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, PFHXS. Missing from this list are the Gen X compound HFPODA and PFNA, which are not yet regulated in California, and they're in the EPA proposal for federal regulation. So in California, we have 2 things. One is called notification level. So notification levels are close to what the EPA set for their kind of trigger levels, but still a little bit higher than what the EPA has. So 5.1 ppt down to 300 ppt, or 500 ppt for PFBS. And then we have the response levels that are even higher. So 10, 40, 5,000, and 20 ppt for the 4 targets. So I expect that if the EPA regulations are approved, and I'm certain they will be with probably minimal changes, then we'll be looking at these levels probably going down to match those EPA levels and adding the 2 additional compounds. So I want to talk a little bit about the methods that are available for analysis. Right, there are just a handful of methods that have now been promulgated and validated by the EPA. These methods are, I think they're pretty well thought out. They've been validated, multi-validated. A lot of labs are running them. I think some have more problems than others. There are some that are better than others, in my opinion, in my experience at least. But there are 2 that have been approved for drinking water. So method 537.1, which is the older method for the first round of UCMR testing for PFAS, and the newer method 533. So they have some kind of big differences, some similarities and differences. Big one is that most people will notice, I think, from the regulatory side and the data user side, is that 533 is a bigger target list, right? 533 has 25 targets versus only 18 targets for 537.1. And these 25 targets, the additional targets that are not included in 537.1, are generally the shorter chain targets, the ones that we would probably see more frequently in the environment. So this is a better method, for kind of environmental monitoring, especially if you're looking at things that maybe are decomposition products of PFAS or newer next generation kind of compounds that could be prevalent in the environment. They both use solid phase extraction as the extraction technique, right? So these samples are collected in the field in a container, they're brought to the lab, extracted using solid phase extraction, concentrated down and analyzed on LCMS. The big difference between the extraction techniques is that 537.1 uses a generic kind of reverse phase solid phase extraction. So this is something that will grab all targets that are of a certain polarity or non-polar out of water and concentrate those. And this is nice because it gives you kind of a broad spectrum. It grabs a lot of things. It doesn't have too much specificity, so you have a better chance of maybe grabbing some unknowns or some non-targeted things, but also has the effect of getting a lot of matrix. So if you're doing this testing in, say, drinking water source, right, source that has maybe surface water, a lot of organics, a lot of other stuff, a lot of junk in it, that extraction cartridge for 537.1 will pull all that matrix out and put it right into your extract and give some problems down the line for the lab. So you'll have matrix effects, you'll have surrogate failures, you'll have kind of weird issues with the data quality. So it's not as robust. So 533 uses something called anion exchange SPE. So this is something that separates compounds out of water based on a charge. Now, for the most part, the majority of these PFAS targets are negatively charged, right? They're acids. Generally speaking, there's some neutrals, but most of them are acids, and they'll be easily retained or removed from water by using this anion exchange solid phase extraction. So that works is it has a positive charge in the cartridge and essentially grabs everything with a negative charge out of the water, but it lets the neutrals through. So in the case of your dirty source water sample with a lot of organics, a lot of matrix, those matrix components, the majority of them are going to go through. Yeah, sure, some acidic things might come through and retain on the cartridge, but by and large, most of the junk is going to be pushed through to waste and gives a much cleaner extract than 537.1 would. So the differences continue between these two methods. So 537.1 uses internal standard quantitation, which is kind of the standard. It's something that we've been using in analytical chemistry for a long time, where you're adding a known compound that's not present in the environment to the sample after the extraction and using that to correct for any inefficiencies in ionization on the instrument or potentially to mitigate any matrix effects that could happen after the extraction. Now, 533 uses a different approach where it's using isotopic dilution. So in this case, you're still using internal standards, but you have a bunch of them and they're exactly the same as the targets of interest. They're just isotopically labeled. So these are added to the extraction, to the sample before it's extracted. The whole sample goes through the extraction process, so any losses we'd see due to the extraction would be noted in the ISs into internal standards, and we use those same internal standards to quantify on the instrument. So it gives a little bit more of a robust method, and it is able to account for a lot of the matrix effects that we'd see otherwise in a dirty sample. So again, the 537.1 has 4 recovery standards, so it's only got conventional surrogates, while the 533 method uses 16 surrogates, so these are the isotopically labeled analogs. And the 537.1 uses 3 additional internal standards that are added after the extraction process to monitor any instrument inefficiencies and correct for any ionization problems there, while 533 uses all 16 of those surrogates for quantitation. So those 2 methods were the drinking water appropriate methods. Those are the ones that are validated and approved for drinking water. There's a lot of demand for PFAS testing in non-drinking water matrix, right? You're looking at things that are urban runoff, landfill leachates, industrial discharge, all kinds of stuff, and they need those samples need a bit of a more robust method. So recently, the EPA has put out a method still in draft. I think it's the 3rd version that's out now, called 1633, which is functionally very similar to 533. So this is essentially an expanded panel 533. They use the same techniques. It has anion exchange, solid phase extraction, uses isotope dilution. We're looking at 45 targets. I think our method has a few more now, but 44, 45 or more target analytes in that method, and it uses 25 or more surrogates and internal standards. So it's pretty much just 533 with an expanded target list. And this method is recently, I think as of a week ago maybe, available on the ELAP FOA, so you can go out and get accredited for this method. And there's one more non-potable water method that also is on the FOAs. That's a bit newer and I think a bit less understood in the industry, but it's called 1621. Now, these 2 methods differ in that 1633 and 537.1 and 533 are all targeted methods, right? These are methods where we're looking specifically at a known list of targets. So in the case of 1633, we have 45 analytes in there, meaning that the laboratory has 45 authentic standards with a second source to validate to make sure the concentration is correct. And we know exactly that compound, how much is in there with high degree of confidence. The issue is that PFAS compounds it's not just 45 of them or 50 or 100 or 1,000. There are thousands upon thousands of these compounds that have been made and potentially could exist. So it becomes more problematic to, if you're looking at kind of the PFAS load in a non-potable water sample, if you want to know what's going out of a wastewater stream, you could look for those 45 targets and maybe get most of them, right? You have a good idea. So this is going to count for 80% of the concentration of PFAS in my sample, but there's still going to be a fraction that we're not going to be able to see. These are going to be things that we either don't have standards for because it's a proprietary chemical used by some manufacturing process that they don't want to put out there. Either or it's too expensive to manufacture the standard, or just a environmental decomposition product of some other longer chain PFAS that we just wouldn't know unless we start poking around and investigating. So the need for that kind of unknown, closing of that gap, right? To find that last little bit of 20% or whatever it is that we're not being able to quantify by a targeted method is where 1621 comes in. So this method is a bit different in that we're taking a sample and concentrating pretty much anything that we can on it onto a carbon tube, right? So this is going to be something that grabs pretty much almost anything organic, concentrate on the carbon, and we do something called combustion ion chromatography, where we burn that carbon, convert it to HF, and measure fluoride using an IC in that sample. So the idea there is that we'd be able to kind of get a better picture, a screen, if you will, of what could be in a sample, and then kind of complement that with a targeted analysis like 1633 to be able to say, okay, well, we know that the targeted compounds account for 80% of what's in our sample, but there's still 20% mass load of organofluorine that is not accounted for, and that's where 1621 comes in. And I'll explain those methods here in a bit. So yeah, and the other thing that is the big difference that I forgot to mention, why not everybody's using 1621, is that it's much less sensitive than 1633 and 533 and 537.1. Because the LCMS methods have those known standards and they use very sensitive techniques, we're reliably able to reach low nanograms per liter or lower, for a lot of these measurements. Problem with 1621 is IC is not as sensitive as LCMS, and the nature of the background and the contamination, the risk of contamination for these analysis is higher. So we're really kind of limited to low ppbs for the detection limit on 1621, which makes it kind of nice for wastewater and non-potable water and things that generally will have a lot of PFAS, probably landfill leachates and discharges, but not great for drinking water. Drinking water, we're looking at, as you saw in the proposed EPA guidelines, low nanograms per liter, 1 to 1.7 ppt. There's no way we can see those levels with 1621. So there's still work to be done to try to get those limits a little bit lower. Now we have some ideas and ways that we can maybe reach those levels, but the issue becomes the background and the contamination and other environmental issues that just are going to make it tough to use 1621 for drinking water. So right now the application really is for non-potable waters or solids or heavily contaminated situations. So, like I mentioned earlier, that there's a huge amount of PFAS compounds out there. Folks are estimating there's over 9,000 PFAS compounds that have been made. And most of these organofluorine compounds are naturally occurring. I would say, almost all of them. There's been some research showing that maybe you can make some organofluorine something or other in a volcano in a very unique situation. But generally speaking, anything that's organofluorine in nature is man-made, and there's over 9,000 of those compounds. So if we look at what 1621 can measure, let's say it can measure maybe a little more than half, right? 1621 is going to be able to capture most of these compounds with the exception of very light compounds. So the volatile, extremely volatile PFAS compounds probably won't be suitable for 1621. Things that are very, very heavy, so very long chain, fatty kind of PFAS targets probably also won't work with 1621. And those, realistically won't work with any technique. They just do not come out of water. Those are things that are very, very happy to be not in water. So we generally don't see them in any field samples, and especially in water samples. In soils and sediments, yes, but not in water samples. Now, if we look at what's available by 1633, this is a much smaller fraction. Now, these boxes are obviously not to scale. We're looking at 45 compounds in 1633 versus 9,000 plus of the blue box. But the kind of wastewater methods in orange here show you what a smaller and smaller and smaller fraction we can see with these different methods. So we get into the drinking water methods, where 533 is about half of what we can see with 1633, 25 targets, so still smaller. But the nice thing about 533 is that it is very similar to 1633. So should the need arise, let's say in a year, 2 or 3, people find out, oh, this other compound is everywhere, it's very harmful, and it's found commonly in drinking water, it can be added probably to 533 and have a easy validation path to get that method and that data out to the public. And the last one is 537.1, which is the original kind of method, has a smaller subset still. It actually has a little bit of overlap with 533, so there are a few compounds that should be outside of that green box. But this kind of shows you the scale of what we're looking at, of how little we're looking in the broader picture of what's out there for PFAS. Now, the compounds included in 1633 are the ones that are most commonly made and most commonly found, and that's if you're going to grab the low-lying fruit, that's the way to do it. But there's still work to be done to kind of capture the rest of these compounds and get a better picture of what's going on in the environment. So the general workflow for 1621, since it's kind of a new method, is a little bit different. So people are familiar with sand volatile analysis, where you're doing extraction and concentration and all that stuff, using GCMS, LCMS, conventional techniques. 1621 is a little bit different. So it uses something called a combustion ion chromatograph. So in this case, we are taking a sample. So you have that white poly container, loading it onto a carbon cartridge, grabbing all the target analytes off there, and then introducing it to the combustion, the CIC, combustion ion chromatograph, that will burn the carbon at high temperature, carry all the gas that are generated from that combustion into a collection vessel, and that'll be run by IC. So a little bit of a clear schematic on how this would work is, as we have our sample bottle there on the left in white, and the carbon tube in green. So this method would practically be done with 2 carbon tubes, right? You look at the breakthrough and see what can capture on the first carbon tube versus second carbon tube. So you stack 2 tubes together, but you'd have a 100 ml volume sample that contains some PFAS in it. So these are going to be the blue dots of PFAS, but it also, since it's an environmental sample, it's surface water or groundwater or something from the environment, probably also contains some inorganic fluorine. So it's going to be fluorine salt, stuff that exists in nature. And this is going to be both present in the sample. So the extraction procedure would be to take the entire contents of the sample, so 100 milliliters, and pass it through that small carbon tube. And the carbon tube, because it's packed with carbon, will grab all of these analytes, right? It'll grab the inorganic fluorine, it'll grab the organic fluorine, it'll grab pretty much everything, a lot of matrix, it'll grab almost everything that's in the sample that can be grabbed, it'll grab and concentrate. Now, because we won't be able to differentiate between organic fluorine and inorganic fluorine once we turn it to fluoride, we have to find a way to remove those pink dots of the inorganic fluoride. So in this case, we'll wash it with sodium nitrite, remove those, the potential for contamination from inorganic fluorine and inorganic fluoride in that case, and then take that carbon tube and put it in a quartz cylinder and burn it at 1,000 degrees under flow of argon with a little bit of oxygen and a little bit of water. So what ends up happening is, as you burn that carbon and all the PFAS compounds, those blue dots that were on there, they all turn into F-, right? They turn to fluoride in the gaseous phase, and because there's a little bit of water in there, it turns into HF. So you have, hydrofluoric acid, essentially you're generating in the tube, these green dots, that then get swept through using the carrier gas, argon and oxygen, into water to make F-. So the system does this whole thing automatically. It'll do the burning of the carbon, making F- or HF, carrying it into the tube of water. And at that point, you have a solution that has fluoride in it, which is very easy to analyze by a conventional IC, and you get a result. Now, the issue here is that, again, the sensitivity is not so high, right? You're not looking at parts per trillion fluoride on general ICs. And you have the other issue of you're concentrating a bunch of compounds that have a lot of fluorines and kind of distilling it down to one measurement, which is total fluorine in your sample in terms of whatever you calibrate against. But it is a good screening tool, and it does show you kind of a better picture of what could be present in the sample in terms of organic fluorine, and kind of you can make assumptions based on that result and do treatment or not do treatment, and have a little bit more information, especially when combined with a method like 1633 that gives you that kind of specificity of targeted analysis as well. So if we look at the conventional methods, right, this is going to be for pretty much the same for 533, 537.1, 1633. The analytical workflow goes like this. So you have a sample from the field that gets concentrated on an SP cartridge. The SP cartridge is either anion exchange for 533 or 1633 533 or 1633, or reverse phase SPE for 537.1. Either way, the sample flows through the cartridge grabs our analytes of interest, probably a little bit of matrix, all your internal standards or surrogates, and that gets concentrated down and transferred to an auto sampler vial, which is then analyzed on an LCMS triple quad, and your analysis comes out. Pretty easy. Problem is, PFAS analysis is notoriously difficult. It's definitely not easy, something I would not recommend anybody should jump into without knowing kind of the pitfalls. So there are a couple of issues that could lead to problems, places where things could go wrong. So one is in the extraction. So you could have contamination, you could have low recoveries, you could have matrix, you have all kinds of issues that would happen during the extraction process. And we have surrogate standards to kind of monitor those things. Or you could have issues during the analysis, right? And issues during the analysis could be things like matrix effects, some co-eluting junk peak that could come out with your target analytes. You could have, for example, in the case of tissue, if you're looking at fish tissues, PFAS and fish tissues, there are some biological compounds that have a similar mass to PFOS, and you could have interference there, or some other problems from the mass spec portion of the analysis. But in addition to those two key areas where you have problems, we have surrogates and standards and ISs to correct for those. There could be problems throughout the whole analysis, right? This is an analysis that's very susceptible to issues, and you really have to be careful what you're doing to make sure these things don't happen. So if we look at the kind of quality control elements for figuring out what happened in every single run. So we have surrogates that get added to every single extraction, and those are used to monitor the extraction efficiency. So surrogates in the case of 537.1 are just regular surrogates. In the case of 1633 and 533, those are going to be isobdilution analogs. Those are added to the bottle before the analysis, and they go through the entire process. They go through the extraction, they go through the concentration, they go through the analysis, and we can kind of see if the surrogates are low, we know that, oh, something must have happened during the extraction process. It could have been matrix problems, it could be a dirty sample, it could be a bad cartridge, it could be something else, but we know that would happen during the extraction process. And the other one that we use are internal standards, right? So these are going to be correcting for ionization inefficiencies on the LCMS. So if you have say a matrix peak that comes out at the same time as one of your target analytes and is competing for that ionization on the instrument, the internal standard will correct for those, chromatographically overlapping contaminants or issues or problems. And the example here is that, for how internal standards work, this question sometimes comes up from some of our customers, so I'd like to run through it and explain it a little bit. We add a internal standard to all samples right before the analysis. So in case of 537.1, it's added after the extraction, but before the analysis. And in this case, it would be I, not peak, the second peak, and T is a target. So what we do in the calibration curve is we add the internal standard to everything, and we look at the ratio between T and I to get an idea of what the let's see if I can get that to load. Can we get that next slide? One more after that. So that response factor would be the ratio between the target area and the internal standard. So that response factor should be similar in a field sample. So the one on the left is a calibration standard, right? The peaks are bigger, there's no matrix problems. But in the case of a field sample where you have a big matrix problem that, say, colludes with both of the target and the internal standards, so you have T prime and I prime, that ratio should still match something on the calibration curve. It will give you your response. So in the case of isobdilution internal standards, we can, like 533 and 1633, we add those standards to the bottle prior to the extraction and carry them all the way through to the analysis. So in this case, it would be something kind of similar to what we showed earlier, right? You have the target and the internal standard, but in the case of isobdilution analogs, instead of being different compounds that are chromatographically resolved and maybe have different effects, if you have a co-eluting peak with a co-eluting junk with the target, but not with the internal standard, it doesn't really do a super good job of correcting for those things. We use the same compound. So essentially, the internal standard is going to be the same exact compound as the target. it'll just be labeled with a heavier isotope, so carbon-13 or deuterium or nitrogen-15 or something else, to make it so that the mass spectrometer can tell them apart, but functionally, chemically, they're identical, right? The chemical properties of a carbon-labeled PFOS are the same as the unlabeled PFOS. So they will extract the same and they'll chromatograph the same. So any issues we see on the extraction for, let's say, PFOS would happen to both the target PFOS and the isotopically labeled analog PFOS. Same thing with the analysis. So that kind of inefficiency or whatever could happen would happen to both of them, and we'd be able to monitor that and correct for it. So that if we know that, oh, there's a colluting peak that makes it so that the recovery of the peak is only 50%. So the peak is half as big as it used to be. It's not a big deal because the IS is half as big and so is the target. So that ratio still is the same and we can still get a reliable number despite the loss or the matrix of problems or whatever would have happened with that. So a good example that I used to teach, isobolution in when I was in grad school is, imagine if you're trying to find out the number of fish in a fishbowl, right? So you have an unknown number of fish in that fishbowl. What you do is you add some labeled fish to it. In this case, we're going to add 5 orange fish to the fishbowl. Let them swim around, do their thing, and then we're going to go and grab a bunch of fish out. So what we do is we'll look at how many fish come out, how many are labeled, and how many unlabeled. So in this case, we have 12 fish total, and only 2 are orange. So we do the math of saying we added X number of labeled fish and the ratio between white and orange fish. So in this case, we added 5 fish, and there were 8 and 2. So we have, that math is actually incorrect. It should be 10. But we have a total number of fish based on how many labeled fish you added to it. So it's kind of an easy way to understand how isobolution works in a field sample. Same idea. We're using, instead of using orange fish, we're using isotopically labeled PFOA and PFOS. So like I mentioned earlier, these methods are pretty tough. They're susceptible to contamination. They can be contaminated in the field when they're collected. So that's why we have field blanks for every single sample, because it's very easy to contaminate if you have dirty hands, if you're wearing a waterproof jacket, if you're doing something potentially that has some exposure to PFAS, if you're wearing waterproof mascara or waterproof lipstick. All these things, even if you don't put your mouth on the bottle or your eye with the mascara in the bottle, still has a risk of contamination. We also are worried about the background in our reagents, the background in our LC, the background in the cartridges and the vials. Everything that we use potentially could be contaminated with PFAS. So we do tons of lot testing. This is part of the QC that we run, the extra QC for every field sample. We run a bunch of QC samples just to make sure that the bottles are clean, the water that we use is clean, the solvent we use is clean, the columns are clean, the vials are clean, all the consumables, all the pipette tips, all that stuff potentially could be contaminated with PFAS because it is a ubiquitous class of compounds. We also are worried about the really low detection limits, and with the EPA limits being close to 1 ppt, any sort of contribution could lead to a problem there and have more issues going down the line. The problem with matrix is more so in non-drinking water samples, right? Sometimes you get a sample that's very, very dirty. So in maybe discharges that need to see 1 nanogram per liter of PFOS, but it's got it's a ton of organic material, a ton of suspended sediments, all kinds of things in there. It's going to struggle. So the matrix does become a problem, especially looking at those very, very low detection limits. And one problem that kind of has come up recently is just this huge amount of sample loads that we're seeing. So I think all labs in the state that are doing PFAS testing, you're seeing an overwhelming number of samples. As more and more people are worried about it, more and more testing is required, and more people are wanting to do testing. It just puts a lot of burden on labs of having a lot of samples. And I'll talk about the sample that we've received in another slide. But it makes it a little bit more difficult. So that leads to workflow bottlenecks where you're able to maybe extract samples quicker than you can analyze them, or process them quicker than they can be extracted. So kind of assessing these challenges becomes somewhat difficult, I guess. So the PFAS work that we've done in the lab, so like I mentioned, we've done this since 2007. So first met those in 2007. Probably did a couple samples, a dozen so samples over the next couple of years. And then UCMR, the first cycle of UCMR PFAS testing kicked in where the limits were very high, and we kind of ramped up a little bit. But over the last couple of years is where it really started coming up in earnest. So this is a picture of our PFAS lab, our LC lab, and now it looks very different because we have a lot more instruments in here. But in 2018, we did 500 samples for PFAS, and then 1,600 in 2019, then 2,400, then 3,700. And last year we did 4,400 samples for PFAS. This is across the drinking water and non-drinking water methods. And this year, as of last week, so today's May 31st, so as of last week before the Memorial Day weekend, we did over 6,500 samples for PFAS, and it's only May, end of May. So it gives you an idea of how much demand there is for PFAS testing. I really don't think that it's going away. I think it's something that is for sure here to stay. These compounds are recalcitrant. They're very long-lived in the environment. And as we find out more and more about the effects and health problems that they could potentially lead to, and there's going to be more demand for this kind of testing. So in our lab, we're ramping up. We're buying more instruments and putting in more people to do the analysis, more automated extractors, more LCMSs, to try to manage this increased workload. Yeah, again, this is a picture of our LC lab, and now this bench that looks so roomy and comfortable, that has all kinds of space for things, is full of LCMSs. So we have now a little bit short on space in terms of bench top for LCMS. So we have a little bit of a space issue, but we're making it work and putting more instruments where we can for more testing. So I think the next slide should be a little walkthrough video tour that I'll speak over. So it'll be a bit quick. It's a kind of hyperlapse video through the lab. So this will be through the sample receiving, and that's me welcoming you in, and I'll show you around. This is our receiving space where all samples come into the lab. Sample receiving guys will log them in, distribute them where they need to go for analysis. So we'll come into the main lab, first into the metals section. So we do ICP, ICP-MS, 200.7, 200.8, 6010, 6020, those kind of methods. We have white chemistry section. So we try to automate as much as we can in white chemistry. It's a lot of manual processes, but as much automation as possible. We have semi-volatiles, GCMS, triple quads, single quads, GCs. We do a fair amount of SPME. So this is a SPME instrument. We're looking for things like taste and odor compounds and 1,4-dioxane. And again, this video was the Friday before a long weekend. So most people had already taken off a little bit early, but we're moving to the VOC lab. We're doing kind of the conventional 524s and 624s in its own space. So it's isolated, segregated space, dedicated air handling units. And this is the LC lab. It's a bench full of LCMS triple quads. And then we'll head upstairs to say hi to the project managers. And I also conveniently neglected to not show my messy desk. And this is the project manager office for everybody who liaises with the client's work. We have our IT department here on the left, and the seminar room for the rest of the lab. So I think there should be a little bit of time for questions. I'm happy to answer them now. Also be on the Slack channel, wherever is for the rest of the conference. So for today and tomorrow, I'll be in Slack, and my email address is up there too. So if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to answer any questions later. If you have questions on PFAS testing in general, how it works, if you want to set it up, if you have questions about Fast and Furious movies too, I'm happy to talk about that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Augustin. One question already. How to prevent contamination of PFAS in sampling?
So PFAS contamination happens in a lot of different spots, right? It could happen, obviously, at any time that you're handling a sample or handling any part of the process, there's a risk of contamination. So when you're doing field sampling, it's really important to be very careful as to what you did right before that sampling. You want to make sure it's just like, I think the best way to do it is to treat it like coliform sampling, right? You don't stick your finger in the bottle. You're extra careful to not touch the cap anywhere. Those kind of things are important for field sampling, especially for PFAS. So things that you want to avoid are getting fast food, wrappers or burgers are wrapped in fast food papers, right? Before sampling. So if you can sample before lunch, that's probably better. I know that a lot of folks will say, oh, you can't shower, you can't wear deodorant, you can't do this or that. We haven't seen that extreme of risk of contamination. Deodorant and shampoos and those kind of things generally don't have a lot of PFAS, risk. But things like waterproof mascara, waterproof lipstick, those products are waterproof because they have PFAS, right? I think waterproof mascara has PFHXS in it. So if you go in put on mascara in the morning or right before, you want to look good for collecting that sample, maybe do it after, those kind of things you want to avoid during the sample collection process. But generally speaking, if you're careful and you treat it like a microsample, like a coliform sample, should be no issue.
Great. One question. What is your favorite, what's the best Fast and Furious movie?
I mean, I'm partial. It's my generation. So Fast and Furious 1 and 2 Fast and Furious, those are my favorites. I think Tokyo Drift, there's a spot for Tokyo Drift. I've appreciated it more in later years, but the new ones were great. I mean, they're all pretty fun, but I like the old school ones.
Awesome. Have you trained your own analysts on PFAS analysis or hired new staff?
Both. So we've the PFAS analysis is not so different from the rest of the analysis that we do. The only difference is that it's we're using a bit different consumables and products, but the techniques are the same. So we've trained our existing staff to do more PFAS analysis. We've also hired a lot of folks to support that and have more people in analysis and the data reduction, the actual running on the instruments, and in the sample prep portion.
Perfect. Given your perspective, how can we avoid PFAS in our lives?
You would have to grow your own food, live somewhere far from people everywhere, and then hope for the best. It's tough. I think PFAS they're so ubiquitous. The issue with PFAS is that they're very useful. They're functionally useful chemicals. Now the drawback is that they're potentially harmful, right? They're potentially carcinogenic or have other health effects, but they are industrially very useful and have a lot of applications and properties. I think as people are more cognizant of the risks, they're doing more work to use alternatives. So instead of using PFAS and grease-proof food packaging and pizza boxes, maybe they can use other things, or have the grease just soak into the paper. Things that would be somewhat inconvenient, but not the end of the world. Is what people are doing, but it's pretty tough to avoid it altogether.
What's your opinion on what Judy was talking about with organizing LTAC as more of an interest body than how it functions now?
I think it's a good idea. I like it. I think that there's a lot of knowledge and experience in LTAC, so leveraging that more efficiently is great, I think.
What's the difference between the ELAP approved certified 1633 versus EPA's draft 1633? When do you anticipate the EPA draft 1633 to be approved?
So they're the same. I mean, Chris might have a better, I think he's replying to it right now, but they should be the same. So the current draft version is the third version. So as the EPA has gone through the multi-lab validation process, they've noticed some issues with the original method that maybe didn't work quite well in multiple labs, so they've corrected those. They've put out limits for things like QC recoveries and water samples and different things. So once the multi-lab validation is completely done, hopefully sometime this year, I'm hopeful that it'd be soon, they will publish the final version of the method. And what I'd imagine, I think Chris could probably clarify that, but I would imagine that ELAP will accredit the most current version of that method because the difference between the third draft and the final draft should just be the limits for soil and or solid matrix samples and aqueous samples for QC limits.
Great. We got two questions that are kind of related, so I'll kind of ask them both at the same time. Do you prep your own containers for sample collection, or are you able to find vendors that provide suitable products? And then another one asking, do you have problems purchasing PFAS analytical supplies such as cartridges?
We don't prep our own bottles. So like I mentioned earlier, the more you handle a sample, the more risk involved, right? So every time you open a container to add the preservatives or open a container to add the sample or to take the sample out, those are potentials for contamination. So we buy our bottles pre-preserved, and we do lot test everything. So unfortunately, that's part of the one of the difficult parts of doing this analysis, that there's a lot of record keeping, a lot of testing up front. So every kit that we get, every bottle, every lot of field sample bottles, every lot of standard bottles, so the containers we store standards in, the vials for the extracts, the collection tubes for the extracts, all that stuff we test up front. And it's generally pretty good, but sometimes it's not. So that's what we have to test. If it was always good, we probably wouldn't stop testing, but we feel more comfortable about it. But because we have had some lots be contaminated with a little bit of this, a little bit of that, we do test everything, and we will reject lots if they do have contamination. So with that in mind, we don't really have an issue with purchasing things, but we do try to purchase upfront, as early as possible, so we don't run out, because we'd have to make sure that those things get lot tested before we put them into production. So we don't want to be in a position where we need this product today or tomorrow, and we put it into production without testing it first. So a little bit of planning definitely goes a long way with this to make sure that you don't run out of consumables or supplies, and you're able to lot test those up front.
Does your lab have any plan to include HI calculations for PFAS on the lab reports?
Yes. So if there's a request for it now, we can do it. So as folks come and ask and say, hey, we'd like to know what our HI is, we can add that calculation. Once the EPA guidelines are finalized and approved, we will be reporting those values in terms of concentration and HI to see if folks are in compliance or not with the MCLs.
Do most clients ask for the full analyte list for EPA 533 or just the 6 regulated PFAS?
The full analyte list. I think that the order does ask for the full list, so we haven't done a shorter list for drinking water in a very long time. Almost everyone's asking for the full list.
On average, what % of PFAS data is qualified for surrogates and or other QC standards not passing method specified control limits?
So it's infrequent. The 537.1 method is going to struggle more with those. So those are ones that we would definitely see bigger problems with matrix. Generally speaking, a failing surrogate is a matrix problem. So the matrix could be things that we've seen in the field are like, high organics in the sample, so that the sample itself is dirty. We've also seen that some bottles, when they're stored very hot or in improper conditions or in the center, something happens to the bottles, we do see some leaching of, we think maybe a plasticizer or phthalate or something that does contribute to some of those problems with surrogate failure. So it's very rare, it's uncommon, but we do see it on occasion. So, maybe less than a couple % of all samples.
Okay. And any additional PPE for staff analyzing PFAS?
So generally speaking, you want to have, PPE is very important. Everybody's got to be careful and safe. That's always a priority. Safety is, for as much as a cliche, safety is first, more than anything. But you want to do two things when doing PFAS analysis, right? You're protecting the staff from the sample. But you're also protecting the sample from the staff, right? So you want to make sure that people are wearing clean gloves. That's something that I think people forget, that they'll slip on some gloves in the morning and then touch everything with those gloves. Gloves should be clean. They should be always clean. If they get dirty, change them out, right? Those kind of common sense precautions have to be taken. And short of that, I think we're pretty careful. Nobody's drinking any samples, right? That's really the bigger issue of consumption. PFAS, like exposure through the skin, is relatively minimal, especially if people are covered up. Everybody has lab coats and safety glasses and gloves. But an important thing is to make sure that the gloves are clean and not touching dirty things with gloves.
Okay, I think we're gonna hit 2 for 1 on this one. Someone's asking you to do a Vin Diesel impersonation, so maybe you can do that while you answer this last question. Of the 6,500 samples analyzed, what percentage is drinking water and what percentage is wastewater?
Oh man, I don't know if I can do a Vin Diesel. I already peaked with my first one. That was as much as I can do. But of the 6,500 samples, I would say probably 80% of them are drinking water, maybe 85%. So a vast majority is drinking water. We've seen a greater demand. I mean, most of our business in our lab is drinking water, and we've seen a greater demand in drinking water because there seems to be at least in our clientele, a bigger push there, a bigger requirement or request and demand than in non-potable water. I suspect that will start to even out in the near future as 1633 becomes finalized. I imagine more and more folks are going to be asking for 1633, especially in non-aqueous matrices, right? A lot of soils, a lot of impacted sites nationwide, airports, air force bases, military installations, power plants, all kinds of heavy industry that would use PFAS are going to have a lot of contaminated soil that would probably need remediation. And a lot of wastewater discharge, especially if the EPA drinking water guidelines go into place. The risk could be there that a heavy industry facility might be held responsible for contaminating a community's water supply if that becomes an issue. So I suspect that there'll be more non-drinking water samples coming.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Augustine. We're already getting comments here in the chat box and in Slack about what a great presentation that was. So thank you so much for that. Right now, we're going to head into a short break. Today, for our little bit of break fun, you'll find a link in the chat for a quick 1-question opinion poll. Cast your vote for your favorite sci-fi franchise. And just to prove how very nerdy I am, there are 3 options instead of the obvious 2. But also feel free to get up and stretch your legs, and we'll resume with our agenda at 10:25. So we'll see you then. Okay, well, welcome back. Thank you everyone for taking that poll. I'm surprised and impressed that Firefly made such a great showing. Apparently I could have gone a little bit more Captain Mal with my outfit today and more of you would have understood the reference. Also, just a quick reminder to join us on Slack. We're having some fun over there, as well as getting a few more of your questions answered. It's always a great way to connect with conference goers and ask questions that you think of after our Q&A sessions. Our presenters are gracious enough to keep answering, so please take advantage of that opportunity. Up next is another one of our stellar LTAC members, Peter Arth. Peter is an environmental scientist with a passion for applying an understanding of the intersection of toxicology, biology, ecology, and chemistry to understand, navigate, and solve complex environmental issues. Over the course of his career in environmental laboratory services and consulting, he's held positions as an analyst, project manager, and operations manager. He's currently the director of Enthalpy Analytical's Environmental Toxicology Division, including the flagship ELAP and NELAP accredited laboratory in San Diego, California, formerly known as Nautilus Environmental. Peter has led laboratory-driven toxicology programs for commercial, industrial, governmental, and academic partners. He is well versed in all aspects of performing and interpreting toxicity tests under guidelines published by a variety of regulatory agencies. His primary technical focus and expertise is the design, performance, and interpretation of site-specific toxicity investigations in freshwater, marine, and terrestrial environments. We are honored to welcome him to the ELAP Con stage.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Jen, and thanks to ELAP for the opportunity to speak today. As Jen mentioned, my name is Peter. I'm the Director for Environmental Toxicology here at Enthalpy Analytical. And so our program today is going to consist of a brief overview of enthalpy, the toxicity testing that we do here in our group in San Diego. And I'm going to dive into a little bit of a comparison between biological and chemical environmental monitoring, and then an update on the statewide toxicity provisions, as well as the ongoing Cereodaphnia dubia statewide study. Next slide, please. All right, next one. All right, so a little bit about enthalpy. Go on to the next slide. All right, so we are a nationwide laboratory provider. We offer a wide range of analyses. Our focus today is going to be where the little blue arrow is in the corner on ecotoxicology, also known as toxicity testing or bioassay testing. We go by lots of names, but we do the same thing. We move on to the next slide. This is just a quick map of where we're located. You can see we have a heavy presence here in California, including our group down here in San Diego. Next slide. Just a brief overview. Sorry, I'm speeding through the first part of this to get through the good stuff. We have a brief overview of the different folks that we help. Toxicity testing has a lot of applications, beyond wastewater. We're working with lots of different regulatory agencies, lots of different industries, and there's a lot of cross-functional sort of applicability to biological testing in different areas: sediment risk assessment, dredge material evaluations, product evaluations, sort of similar to what Augustine talked about. There's lots of different niches and places in which ecotox can have a sort of valuable data add to your regulatory program. All right, our little group here in San Diego is kind of unique in that we're a hybrid laboratory and consulting group. We focus solely on toxicity testing, and we aim to be an additive partner with expertise not just in the laboratory testing aspect, but also in the related regulatory aspects that govern the testing that we perform. Our mission is anchored in generating high quality, legally defensible data for science-based solutions. That's a fancy way of saying we love solving problems. I think the one thing that I want to highlight on this slide to the listeners is that we really love doing these presentations. So, again, thank you to ELAP for the invitation, but I'll extend that invitation out to anybody here who's listening. We routinely present to different trade groups like CWEA. We present to water boards. Sometimes we present to both dischargers and water boards together, and we really try to act as sort of an educational resource for anything toxicity related. So please feel free to reach out. We're happy to set up presentations for you if you find this interesting. This slide just shows a few of the services and what we do, and after we get through this, we're going to go on a little virtual tour of our lovely operation. This is the front of the building. The space actually used to be a carpet factory, believe it or not. We bought the building and we tore it down to the split face to build out the laboratory just for what we do. I have had almost nobody believe that it's a laboratory when they're looking at the front of it. I've had it called a church. I've had it called some sort of a manufacturing facility, but never a laboratory. But it is a laboratory. All right, so this is sort of a bird's eye view of the space. The main testing space down in the lab is where we do a lot of the prep work. The building's 2 stories, and actually the offices are a ring around the top. And so there are lots of these windows where you can actually peer down and see everybody working in the space below. It's a rather large space. We're about 18,000 square feet total, which makes us one of the larger labs in the country that do what we do. This is a ground view of the main lab space. This is where most of the prep work is completed. We went for sort of a bit of an industrial look, if you will, for the lab. I take literally zero credit for any of the design aspects for it. That is certainly not my forte, but it's a really nice space. And again, similar to the presentations, anybody who finds themselves in the area of San Diego, if you want to come by for a tour, we're happy to host folks and show you around. It's a very unique laboratory and very different from an analytical one. This is the inside of one of our 11 environmental chambers where most of the testing takes place. Toxicity testing requires tight controls of environmental parameters like temperature and light. And the reason for this is that, ultimately we want to know that any responses that we measure in a sample are a function of what is contained in that sample as opposed to any parameters that may be necessary for sustaining biological life. So we do a lot of work to take water quality measurements, pH dissolved oxygen, we control light and temperature very tightly. And the reason for that is, again, that we want to make sure that any responses in the sample are due to anthropogenic contaminants as opposed to, fish running out of oxygen and not being able to live. So like I said, we've got 11 of these. They're all set to different temperatures and we're doing different types of testing in them. This is a shot of the flow-through room. So we're blessed, I guess is the word that I would use, to have a full natural seawater flow-through system. It's fed through a big 5,000-gallon tank in the back. And so this is where we perform a lot of our longer-term bioaccumulation tests. What you see in the picture here is actually a host of adult organisms. The tanks with the blue labels, you can see there's some mussels in there. There's some abalone down in the lower left-hand corner, and then just sort of passed off in the upper right, you can see the orange labeled tanks actually house purple sea urchins. We don't test any of these adults, so these organisms are all used in either fertilization or embryo development assays, and so we're actually extracting the gametes from them, fertilizing them outside of the samples, and then introducing them to the samples in the embryo development tests, and watching how the morphology of the control groups against the sample groups go after a 48 to 96 hour period. So analysts will score normal and abnormal development under a microscope, and that's the endpoint for determining whether there's toxicity or not. All right, and this last picture is a few of our folks that are actually performing the testing. Like I mentioned, there's a fair amount of microscope work that goes on in our facility. Down in the right-hand corner, you can see someone scoring a giant kelp germination and growth test. You can see some feeding going on in the upper right-hand corner, and then in the middle picture with the woman that is in the purple shirt, she is working on a urchin fertilization test, which is one of the more challenging from a time commitment standpoint assays that we offer, also highly sensitive. So all the work is done with human hands. We're a very instrument poor, if you will, type of testing organization, in that, our instrument for measurements, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and the differences between analytical and biological testing, is the test organisms, and then the humans that are with our organization are the ones that are down there doing the work with their hands and fingers and eyes. All right, so just to give a little primer to move through this, we're going to do a brief overview of toxicity testing. Toxicity testing was born out of the Clean Water Act. The second bullet is the most important one: no discharge of toxic substances in toxic amounts. That's ultimately what brought forward the practice of toxicity testing as it relates to NPDES monitoring. And then, as I mentioned earlier, bioassay testing goes by a number of different names, right? So environmental toxicology, ecotoxicology, or WET, which is whole effluent toxicity testing. You know, as Jen highlighted in the introduction, the reason I love doing what I do is because biotoxicity testing is so multidisciplinary, right? You know, I often describe it as the interaction between the chemistry of water and sediments, the organismal biochemistry of how chemicals interact with test organisms, and then the mathematical aspect, which is the statistical evaluation that's used to determine if an effect is present or not. So very multidisciplinary, very interrelated, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm so fascinated by it and have been doing it for so many years. All right, so the next section of the presentation is going to get into the weeds on this slide a little bit. I have it up here just as a primer for what we're going to talk about later, which is, you know, analytical chemistry and toxicity testing tend to work hand in hand with each other, right? One measures what's there, the other measures whether there's an effect to it or not. So don't worry about memorizing these things right now. We're going to get into it a little bit later. All right, and these last two slides of this section are just pictures of some of the cool stuff we get to work with, right? So you have a bunch of common marine species there and a bunch of common freshwater test species here, including the freshwater water flea, the Cereodaphnia dubia, which is everybody's favorite if you have an NPDES discharge permit and are currently regulated with that species. We'll talk a little more in depth about that when we get to the end and talk about the update on the statewide Cereo study that's going on right now. All right, so the next section, as I mentioned, is going to dive into a little of the focus on what the differences are between analytical chemistry and biological testing. All right, this is a busy slide. Don't worry about trying to get all this down. We're going to get into more detail later, but I thought, or I should say my co-author on this, Katie Payne, thought a Venn diagram would be most fitting to sort of show where the overlap and the differences between the two analyses are. You can see that there is a fair amount of shared commonality, but they all have their sort of unique aspects to them. At a high level, there's a lot of similarities between the two practices, right? So, I mean, both analyses are generally driven by regulations in the form of an NPDES permit or different monitoring requirements, cleanup requirements, whatever they may be. Both have a host of QA/QC requirements. They follow published methods, which are then turned into standard operating procedures by the individual labs, which in turn are accredited by agencies like ELAP to make sure that everything is being done in a traceable and appropriate way, and the good QA/QC practices are being followed so that the clients can ultimately rely on the data that the laboratories produce. Ultimately, chemical and biological analyses are measuring the same things. They're just going about it in slightly different ways, right? So, I mean, chemical analyses are quantifying what is present in a sample. Biological tests are more or less determining whether there's a response to the presence of that analyte or group of analytes that are there, right? So these analyses work hand in hand with each other, and to understand whether there is an ecological risk or whether there is a potential human health risk, you kind of need both sides of the house to work together, because without one, you don't necessarily have the context to frame the other, right? So if you just see a response in a biological test, but you have no way of quantifying what is in there, you're a little bit lost. If you quantify something that's in there, you're left with the question of, well, is that bad or not bad? And so these two really do work hand in hand with each other and provide multiple lines of evidence to sort of determine whether there is an ecological or a human health risk present. QA/QC, incredibly important in both practices. Ultimately, the requirements are different, right? So, I mean, they aim to accomplish the same thing, which is to validate the response that is measured in the sample. This is done through the use of various blanks, spikes, and again, you know, they're done in different ways, but there are some relatable and translatable analogs between the two, and I kind of have those up on the slide as I constantly seek to translate what the world is like in biological testing for those that are more familiar with chemical testing, because ultimately from an industry standpoint, there's a lot more analytical chemistry that goes on than biological testing. Both practices also employ things like holding times, although we're going to highlight some of those differences between holding times and preservation later, and proficiency testing, right? So again, all of these are QA/QC measures to ensure that you, when you send your sample in, are receiving results that are reliable, and you can be certain of the outcome that's handed to you in your report. All right, the last set of similarities to highlight is that both measurements come with analyses, right? So all the samples are not created equal. Augustine highlighted some of these challenges in his presentations. My point of highlighting this is that labs have to use their technical know-how and their experience to develop techniques to address challenges with different types of samples, depending upon what the analysis is, what the matrix is, how low the detection limits are, whether you're trying to test a marine sample with a freshwater target species. So there's all kinds of confounding factors that can go on. And so I think that, Augustine did a great job of sort of highlighting some of those technical challenges and how WEC has been able to adapt with regard to measuring PFAS. And the same thing exists on toxicology, right? There are different types of challenges because we're working with biological life, and so all samples are not created equal, and adaptations have to be made. And so laboratories are left with, using the broad guidance of the method, the standard operating procedures that they work with, and then using their own wherewithal and know-how to be able to work with clients, make adaptations as needed to provide reliable and accurate data depending upon what the project requirements are. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and get into what are the differences between the two. As I was putting this presentation together and mulling over what the biggest difference to highlight is, I think the biggest difference to highlight is sort of a targeted versus a non-targeted analysis. So most analytical methods, I know there are non-targeted analyses for chemical methods as well, but most analytical methods are looking for an analyte or a group of analytes, whereas biological testing, quote unquote, sees everything. Not to be creepy about that. Toxicity testing is anchored in the regulatory world sort of as an ultimate backstop. Judy pointed out that there are limits to technology or available methods for what we can measure, and Augustine highlighted that there can be limits to how low the measurements can go. Toxicity testing isn't subject to these limitations. My good friend Freddie the Fathead Minnow does not have a method detection limit, and he or she doesn't care if there's a codified method for what they're feeling a response to. If there's an environmental stressor present in the sample, they're going to show a response. And so ultimately that's sort of the place that toxicity testing gets. There are tens of thousands of potential contaminants of concern present in the environment. And while we have a limited number of analytical methods to measure those, toxicity testing is able to measure those environmental stressors without necessarily having an analytical method present for it. Now, this is not to say that it doesn't show challenges down the road, right? Because part of what we do here is called toxicity identification investigations, and that's to get into samples that have shown an effect or a response and try to determine what is driving that. And so a lot of the times we rely on analytical chemistry to be able to quantify those responses and say to your client, this is what the stressor is that's driving the response in your sample. And so, if anybody is a huge advocate for, whether it's LTAC or regulatory bodies continuing to develop methods and develop technologies, it is those of us that are here on the toxicity side, because the faster those methods come along, the easier our job is in being able to understand what those responses in the samples to the biological stressors actually are. Another big difference is time, right? So chemical analyses are usually able to be completed within a day or a couple of days, whereas biological tests take a significantly longer period of time. Most analyses take at least a week, but there are some assays that are available that last up to 28 or even 42 days in length. So let that one sink in, that somebody has to watch and monitor a test for a month and a half before it's over. These can't be sped up, right? We often get asked whether we can rush analyses, and the answer is yes, but within the limits of the test method. So if the EPA says the test needs to last 7 days, I can't complete it on a 48-hour turnaround. Not the way that it works. But ultimately, you know, that is one of the differences that I wanted to pull out and highlight on this, is that, you know, biological testing takes time, it takes effort, it takes maintenance of the test 365 days a year. And so while we want to move as fast as we can to get you the data in your hands, just understand that there are method required limits on how fast data can be turned around and analyses can be completed. This slide sort of highlights a few of the more what I would call operationally based differences between the two practices. I think the one to pluck out of here is sort of the data handling aspect of it. So chemical measurements tend to produce a concentration as a raw numerical value, which is pretty straightforward, right? There are X number of milligrams per liter of substance Y, or there's Z amounts milligram per kilogram in this soil or in the sediment. Toxicity data is harder to handle, right? So I mean, you're measuring biological responses in a sample group and then comparing it to a control group. The data is analyzed using a statistical test, depending on what the project requirements are and what your permit requirements are. And then it can actually takes us, you know, to the last section of the presentation, which is an update on the statewide toxicity provisions. So in 2020, the State Water Resources Control Board voted to adopt the toxicity provisions, which will unify the regulation of inland surface waters for toxicity requirements. The Water Board then sought approval of both the provisions as well as the test of significant toxicity, or TST, through an ATP process. And that test, the TST, will become the standard analysis for toxicity data under the provisions. And we'll talk a little more about the TST later, but I think the one point to pull out of this one is that on May 1st of this year, the State Board did receive approval on both the provisions and the TST. So as a heads up for anybody who has an NPDES permit, these regulations will be coming to a permit near you. All right, this slide just sort of goes through the applicability of the provisions. As I mentioned, these will govern inland surface waters, but we've had indications that the basis of these provisions will be introduced to the California Ocean Plan, which governs marine and Pacific Ocean discharges, in the next update to that ocean plan, which should be coming in the next year or so. So also heads up, if you hold a marine discharge permit, the TST and the provisions will likely be incorporated into your permit as well. All right, so what does this mean for me? The first is that you can count on the provisions being incorporated in your next permit renewal by your local regional board. I think on that note, the one piece that I want to pull out of here is to really make a strong recommendation that you, as the holder of the permit and probably a trusted partner as well, should review the draft when you get it from your regional board for your next permit renewal. You want to ensure that you understand the changes that are present in the provisions and ensure that they're compliant and aligned with the provisions, the requirements that you get in your permit. The provisions, I think, are 60 some odd pages long, so it is a doable read. But with that being said, you know, you should certainly engage someone who's followed this process, since these have been in the works for the better part of, oh, I don't know, 12 to 15 years or so. Phil Markle from LA County Sanitation had a great slide in one of his presentations where he kept crossing out the years as it started in its inception in 2009 and 2010 to where we are today in 2023 with the formal adoption for it. All right, this slide is just a brief overview of the TST, or the test of significant toxicity. There are a lot of changes with this analysis relative to the older no effect concentration or no effect system that most NPDES permits were or currently regulated under. I could go on for the better part of several hours talking about all these differences, but I think the one to pull out that is probably most applicable to dischargers or NPDES permit holders that are listening is how test data variability can affect the outcome of the analysis. It really is critical for you to work with your testing lab, and depending on their historical performance and what test species you're currently monitoring with, there may be a need or desire to increase the replication in the test to ensure that sample failures are not attributable to high data variability. And so ultimately, this is rooted in the way the statistical analysis is done. I should say that, you know, the methodology behind the toxicity testing itself, the physical conduct of the test is not changing with the provisions. The biggest shift is really in the statistical evaluation of the data and how that is used for the purpose of regulatory compliance. And so there's a reversal of what's called the null hypothesis in the statistical method, whereas the older NOEX system used to assume that samples were not toxic and the statistical program basically had to prove that they were, whereas the TST reverses this and assumes samples are toxic and the statistical program has to reject the null hypothesis to say no, they are not. And so that's the reason that this test variability is so important. And again, you know, happy to talk more about this either offline or in a separate presentation. So feel free to just let us know. All right, and in this last slide, I wanted to provide just a brief update on the statewide Cereodaphnia study, which is currently facilitated by SCORP at the direction of the state of California. The study was launched, oh gosh, I want to say about 1.5 years ago. I currently am the stakeholder for commercial labs in California on that committee, and the study was commissioned to investigate the potential sources of inter and intra-lab variability for this assay. The study is progressing along. We've gotten through an entire round of round-robin testing. The results were presented by SCORP to the stakeholders and to the independently commissioned science panel that is overseeing this and providing guidance on the study. Some adjustments were made and we're into the second round right now. In fact, I believe most of the labs will be receiving samples today for the final round of testing in the second round of round robin, and then the results of the study will be published and available later this year, so stay tuned on that. All right, and so in this last slide, just want to acknowledge my co-author and longtime colleague, Katie, who probably should get more credit for this presentation than I do. But ultimately, I'm happy to take questions now, or you can feel free to reach out to either of the two of us, and we will respond either one-on-one with you, or if you have a presentation that you'd like to see from us. And thank you all for your time. Thank you again to ELAP for the invitation to present, and most gracious.
Awesome. We do have a couple questions already piling up. So forgive me, my chemist is going to shout on some of these because I don't speak some of these words. So for chronic toxicity with solanastrum, do you do continuous shaking?
Yeah, so there's 2 allowances in the method to either do it as a continuous shake or a 3 times a day rotate and manual shake. We do perform the test both ways. We have you know, basically we will work with the discharger to determine the best method for their sample, but generally speaking, you know, the continuous shaking has some advantages over the static, and so we do make the recommendation that if you are seeing any effects in your sample, that you at least try, and you're using the static method, that you try the continuous shaking method and see if there's a potential difference in the results.
And how do you demonstrate that a new analyst has capability to conduct toxicity testing?
Well, that's a great question. Analyst training is probably something that we spend more time and money on than anything else in our operation. So, you know, again, we're not a super instrument heavy group, so I'm not buying, you know, $250,000 triple quads like poor Augustine has to, but what we are doing is investing a significant amount of time in analyst training. So we have a rigorous QA program where somebody goes through basic training and then they work independently with a trainer and then independently on their own on what are called reference toxicant tests. And so these are positive controls that are used in toxicity testing to ensure you know, uniform lab operations as well as to ensure organism sensitivity. And so they have to do what's called a demonstration of capability, or an IDOC, on any assay prior to working on a client sample. So they have to complete the assay, they have to show they can meet the test acceptability criteria for that given assay, and they have to show that they can achieve a sensitivity level that is comparable to other tests that are run in the lab. And so there's a significant amount, 6 months at least, of training on non-client related samples prior to being introduced to into live samples. So that's our program. I know a lot of different labs may do it differently, but we do truly believe that a rigorous analyst training program is probably one of the most important things for a toxicity lab to do, given that there are not a lot of colleges that offer degrees in what we do, and we're training a lot of folks that have good backgrounds in biology and chemistry, but have not necessarily worked in a whole effluent toxicity lab.
Great. And do you see other states seeking ATP approval for the TST like California?
Yeah, I think that there's a possibility. I mean, the TST has been around for a really long time. It's not a new invention that came around. It's the application of the TST to toxicity data, and ultimately, it was done to some extent as a simplification so that there is a fairly easy pass-fail result that comes out. So from a regulatory context and for someone who's abiding by an effluent limitation, there is an ease to a pass-fail as opposed to having to deal with toxicity units, and those can be calculated 3-4 different ways. That's where the TST sort of came into play in California. I think there is a reasonable likelihood that other states will begin to adopt this as the statistical analysis for toxicity data. I, as a native Californian, like to think that we are usually on the forefront of environmental monitoring and regulation and health of the environment. So as California goes, others follow. So I do think that there is a reasonable likelihood, especially now that there's been a legal precedent set that the TST is an acceptable method under the promulgated and published EPA methods, that that it will be applied for other states for determining compliance with toxicity data.
Perfect. Where do you purchase species when you can't breed them in-house?
Yeah, so that's a fun one. It's a mishmash, right? So I mean, there are a few commercial suppliers throughout the country who are aquacultures that are breeding these species. So we get the majority from outside suppliers. We actually only culture a couple of them in-house ourselves. Our lab is mostly focused on the testing and not necessarily the culturing of them, but we source some from the wild. So we do have some wild caught organisms that we send divers out to go collect, like the kelp and the sea urchin. Abalone is a fun one. Can't catch those in California. That's not legal. So we actually purchase them from one of two commercial suppliers that are mostly producing them for restaurants. And so we actually will take their gravid broodstock, which are not necessarily good for the eating of the abalone, and we'll use those. But we have at least two source suppliers for every of all of the 30 some odd test species that we offer here in the facility. So if we do have an interruption of one supplier, we have another one that is on hand and available, with the one exception of one of the core marine species, which is the Pacific topsmelt, of which there is only one culturing facility in the entire country. And so when they have a bad time, every lab in the country has a bad time.
Awesome. Do you test the water for COD before testing? And what about the effluent?
Yeah, so, it's a good question. So all of the dilution water that we are using for either negative controls or to dilute the samples to the in-stream waste concentration, which is the regulatory compliance point for a point source NPDES discharger, all of those get tested annually for a variety of priority pollutants. We do monitor dissolved oxygen on a daily basis in both dilution waters and in samples. And so we're looking for both COD and BOD, basically oxygen depletion and oxygen demand, which we will supply supplemental aeration to those samples to ensure that whether it's COD or BOD, there isn't a depletion of dissolved oxygen that causes the response in the test organism. So it's something that we're hyper aware of. We don't test it in the samples when they come in the front door, and we don't test it on our dilution water daily, but we do monitor dissolved oxygen levels on a daily basis to ensure that that is not a potential cause of a response either in the control or the sample groups.
Have you seen final effluents causing the selenastrum to adhere to the side of the flask?
Yes, that is something that can happen, in which case I would strongly advise you to work with your lab and have the testing done on a continuous shaking basis. So oftentimes it's driven by higher hardness samples. So if there's a greater amount of calcium and magnesium present in the sample, so if you're testing waters that are, you know, in a hardness range north of, I'd say 200 milligrams per liter is calcium carbonate, you'd want to consider that. You should also be asking your lab for bench notes if analysts are making observations of that adherence. If they are, removing the algal cells from the walls of the flask is an important step in making sure that you're getting uniform measurements between your control waters and your sample to ensure that it is not a result of that adherence that is causing lower cell density in the effluent sample itself.
And then a couple questions kind of in tandem. What knowledge, skills, and abilities are you looking for in an analyst to be successful in this discipline? And where can someone learn more about this if they want to get into this area? And are there any conferences they can attend?
Oh, very exciting. So I would say that the one skill that we are most interested in analysts and technicians is not a science-based one per se, but it is curiosity. So this is one of sort of the core cultural values that we have here is a sense of curiosity, a desire to learn is probably one of the most important things that you can come into this practice with. And the reason is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are not a lot of undergrad programs. I think there are 3 in the whole country last time I checked that offer an undergraduate education in toxicity testing, or at least is primarily anchored there. There are a few more graduate programs that are available, but I think a desire to understand that intersection between what's happening chemically in the matrix, whether it's a product or an ambient water, a wastewater, a stormwater, a sediment, a soil, understanding the biochemistry of the organisms that are being worked on, how those two interplay with each other, and at least a minor interest in mathematics and statistics to be able to evaluate those test data, right? Understanding when the TST may be applicable for a wastewater sample, whereas in a sediment risk assessment, that would not be the statistical analysis that you would want to use to compare data to each other. So I think curiosity is the one thing that I would say in terms of a technical background. All flavors, you know, I mean, we've got folks that are biology majors that majored in marine biology, that majored in chemistry, that majored in ecology. So there is no one degree that is going to be super perfect or super not perfect to this. We provide a significant amount of training to everybody that comes in the front door. And so I would say a sense of curiosity is the most important skill that you can come with. In terms of where can you find out more about this, you can feel free to email me or Katie is one way, but I would say the best conference to learn about this is probably CTAC, so the Society for Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, especially if you're a student or are in a graduate program right now. So there are local chapters that go on. There's one in Northern California, there's one in Southern California, and then there is a North American chapter that has an annual national meeting that's there. But if you look up your local chapter, they often have quarterly dinner meetings, they often have an annual conference, they're relatively affordable to go to. But in terms of a conference resource, that's probably your best one as an introduction to it. And then otherwise, I would just say talk to practitioners, talk to people who have gone through the journey, who are currently working in ecotox, either in a consulting setting for an architecture and engineering firm, in a laboratory, or in an academic setting.
Great. And then what are your opinions about Judy's ideas for LTAC?
I think they're good. You know, I mean, I fundamentally agree with her that to some extent we feel like a slightly underutilized resource. I think that there are so many challenges that are presented both to the regulators who are, you know, overseeing the dischargers, the laboratories that are performing the work and producing the data that the dischargers are submitting to the regulatory agencies. I think that they're, you know, to try to engender a firmer level of collaboration amongst those entities is something that LTAC should sort of find a way to get ourselves into, right? So Judy had a great point. The expertise is present. You have some great minds, excluding myself, but you have some great minds in the practitioner side. You have some great minds on the accrediting agency side for ELAP. You have stakeholders that are part of the discharger community as well as the regulator community at the state level. I think finding ways to continue to foster those interactions with each other is probably one of the best things that LTAC can do going forward as an active stakeholder in the communities that we serve.
As a lab director, what's the best advice you can give to a lab professional who wants to follow in your footsteps?
Interesting. Well, you know, I would say that being well-rounded is probably one aspect. If you seek to lead your own group one day, I think investing in your own personal development, especially with regard to leadership, I'll say that, you know, I get a lot of technical stuff. I do a lot of consulting. I do a lot of interaction with different parties. I think that staff management, staff leadership is probably one of the most important aspects of leading an organization. And so, you know, really educating yourself, growing on your own personal journey as a leader is helpful. And beyond that, from a more practical standpoint, you know, diversify yourself out, right? So try to spend time in all the different aspects of the operation as you're coming up through your career, right? So for you to be able to lead an organization and relate to an analyst that was hired 1 month ago, you have to have been an analyst. You have to understand client service aspects. So working in business development, working in client management as a project manager, working as a technical expert, and then ultimately understanding, you know, the business aspect of it, right? So being comfortable with financials, being comfortable with numbers, being comfortable in running a business. It's sort of it's an interesting question, because if you had asked me 15 years ago whether I thought I would end up where I am right now, I would say, nah, I'm just going to be a science guy. And ultimately, I still am a science guy. That's what I love. That's the bread and butter. But I'm super pleased to have picked up all the different skills through the mentorship that I've had over my years in my career. And I'll say that that's one more plug to put in there for someone who's looking to lead, is really learn from those of you who have walked in the footsteps before and seek to improve and grow on what they've done. So I've been blessed to have a number of mentors over my time, both starting at the bench level all the way up through learning how to run the business and becoming a technical guy that I am now. So a huge amount of where I am and any success that I've seen, I attribute to those who took the time to mentor and teach. And so two aspects of that is, one, seek that mentorship, and two, when you get there, return it back the other way and make sure you're taking the time to mentor those who are working for you, who are seeking to succeed and seeking to grow.
Awesome. We have one more fun question that we'll end with. It says, who is your favorite Star Wars character? I will not limit you to a particular franchise, though. So if you don't want to say Star Wars, obviously, I'm a little bit of a Trekkie, so, you know. So
I didn't vote on the poll, but, you know, sort of similar to Augustine, my generation was the next generation. So I am a hard Captain Picard fan. I would say that if I had to pick one out, that's where I would go. Like Worf would be kind of like right below that probably, but yeah, if I had to pick one, and I love Patrick Stewart, to be fair. So
and who doesn't? Thank you so much, Peter. We really appreciate having you here this morning and all of the knowledge that you shared with our ELAP Conference attendees. One more plug for how to use the Q&A chat box. You guys are doing a great job asking questions, but just to make sure we all know how to put our questions in the chat box, we have that popped up for you right now. And then our final presentation for today comes from Samuel Choi. Sam is the environmental supervisor in the Laboratory Monitoring and Compliance Division at the Orange County Sanitation District. Specifically, Sam oversees the sampling, general chemistry, and microbiology groups in the laboratory. He's been working in wastewater utility for more than 12 years, previously serving as a microbiologist, focusing on both compliance and research work. He holds a master's in environmental engineering and a PhD in environmental science with an emphasis in environmental microbiology. Sam holds a part-time faculty position at the Cal State University, Fullerton in the position at the Cal State University Fullerton in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Sam, we are so glad to have you with us this morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the introduction. And well, thank you everyone for inviting me to present here at ELAPCon as both LTAC member for ELAP and to represent Orange County Sanitation District. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on an overview of OC-SAN's ocean monitoring program. So OC-SAN is short for Orange County Sanitation District. And I think it's very appropriate given that we have World's Ocean Day coming up on June 8th. So with that said, my presentation will include an introduction to OC-SAN, and then I'll provide an overview of the Environmental Laboratory and Ocean Monitoring Division and its several ocean monitoring elements. Then I'll take a deeper dive into the beach monitoring program as a special focus for the presentation, and I'll finally close up and open it up for questions. Next slide. So our mission statement here at OC-SAN really captures what we do here at our agency. Our mission is to protect public health and the environment by providing wastewater collection, treatment, and recycling for our service area. Our organization is truly committed to achieving this mission, and we strive towards this each day to make this a reality. And my presentation today is just one of many activities that go on here to make this possible. So this slide here is it's a slide of our service area. We are a publicly owned wastewater treatment agency, and so we are governed by a 25-member board of directors, which includes a representative from 20 of the cities we serve, 4 special districts, and 1 representative from the Orange County Board of Supervisors. We have 2 treatment/reclamation facilities located in Fountain Valley and Huntington Beach. We have flows that come from residential, commercial, and industrial facilities that connect essentially to the local sewer, and from there they connect to our large diameter regional sewer pipes, which bring in wastewater from various sources. We own and maintain 400 miles of pipe and 15 pump stations throughout 479 square miles of Orange County. The reason why we have these pump stations is that although ideally we would like our sewer collection system to be a gravity-fed system, because of the geography of our county, not all areas slope towards one of the 2 plants, and so we need so the flow needs help to reach one of the 2 treatment plants. So we use these large pump stations that essentially lift or push the water from lower elevations through pressurized pipes until the water flows again by gravity. So it's a pretty large service area, which makes us the 3rd largest wastewater treatment agency west of the Mississippi. So here's a aerial view of our 2 treatment reclamation plants. The first, as I mentioned, is located in Fountain Valley. It's a 100% reclamation plant, meaning that we recycle all the water that comes into this plant for our groundwater replenishment system, which I'll talk about more in the next slide. And then the second plant is located in Huntington Beach. And just recently, late last year, we achieved a full reclamation. So essentially called a full expansion of our GWS program. So we're producing up to 130 million gallons per day of recycled water. Next slide. So here's a nice graphic showing an overview of our wastewater collection system. So as I mentioned, we have 3 main sources of wastewater that comes from residential flows, businesses such as restaurants, and industrial facilities such as metal finishing companies. The wastewater will flow through private laterals, or it'll enter through local sewers, and those local sewers will then connect to OC-SAN's regional trunk lines. Here's a quick kind of a wastewater 101. So essentially the wastewater will go through bar screening, primary treatment, which is essentially a physical removal of suspended solids. And then I'll go through secondary treatment, which is essentially a biological treatment process to remove dissolved, suspended, and organics. And from there, the highly treated secondary effluent will either go to the groundwater replenishment system. So essentially it goes to next door to the Orange County Water District for advanced treatment, where the product water will essentially meet or exceed drinking water standards. And then the non-reclaimable flows will get ocean discharged through our 5-mile, 120-inch submarine outfall. And so because of this ocean discharge, we have final effluent and receiving water limitations per the ocean plan and basin plan, which contains both numeric and narrative water quality standards. And then we have also monitoring and reporting requirements to evaluate potential environmental and human health impacts from our discharge to the Pacific Ocean, which I'll touch on in this presentation. Next slide. Okay, so here's a kind of a fun trivia question, but the answer is there for you. And the question is, how much wastewater comes from 2.6 million people that we serve in our service area? So the answer is 180 million gallons per day, and that's how much we treat on a daily basis. I mean, the number is huge, but to kind of give you perspective on how much water that is, every day, essentially, we treat enough water to fill the Angel Stadium 2.5 times a day. So it's a lot of water. Next slide. Okay, so now going into kind of a overview of our environmental services department. So we are one of 6 departments here in Orange County Sanitation District. And so under the environmental services department, we have 3 divisions. Starting from left to right, we have the resource protection division, otherwise known as the pretreatment program. We have the environmental compliance division. And then we also have the environmental laboratory and ocean monitoring division, which I'm going to be focusing on today, as indicated by the green circle. So under this division, we have 3 sections. We have the ocean monitoring section, the analytical chemistry section, and the microbiology, general chemistry, and sampling section. So together, these 3 sections oversee and support numerous monitoring programs, which I'll be covering. In addition, the laboratory operates 365 days a year to support the day-to-day functions, such as operations to provide real-time data. So our environmental monitoring programs are regulated at the federal, state, and regional levels. At the federal level, Title 40 or 40 CFR, protection of the environment, is the section of Code of Federal Regulations that deals with EPA's mission of protecting human health and the environment, which our laboratory and ocean monitoring programs are regulated under. And then at the state and regional levels, we work closely with the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board to ensure that we are protecting our environment by meeting water quality objectives. And then in addition, every 5 years upon approval, OCSAN will adopt a new National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System permit known as NPDES. And as described in the NPDES permits, OCSAN's Ocean Monitoring Program are designed to include core compliance monitoring, regional monitoring, and strategic process studies. Next slide. And so I'm sure as many of you out there, OCSAN's laboratory is a compliance laboratory, which means we must be accredited to perform laboratory tests for compliance purposes. OCSAN's laboratory is accredited at the national, state, and regional levels. I want to take a moment here to give a shout out to ELAP team for keeping us operational by continuing to work with us to ensure that we maintain accreditation so that we can continue to do what we do here at OCSAN. Next slide. So the table here on the left shows the various groups of laboratory tests that are performed annually, which includes general chemistry or wet chemistry, metals chemistry or inorganic chemistry, microbiology, organic chemistry, and toxicology. So collectively, we run approximately 100,000 tests per year. The pie chart on the right illustrates the breakdown of the laboratory support that's provided based on the percentage of laboratory tests that are performed for major programs or divisions. So these 4 account for approximately 90% of the laboratory tests that we perform annually. And so these numbers are pretty consistent from year to year. Next slide. So at this time, I'm going to introduce you to our ocean monitoring program, and I have a video here if you don't mind playing it. So the drivers behind our ocean monitoring program, as I mentioned, are the basin plan and the ocean plan, which essentially designate beneficial uses, establish water quality objectives, and contain implementation programs and policies to meet these objectives. So our primary goals are then to demonstrate that our ocean and beaches are safe to swim through water quality monitoring. We also do monitoring to ensure that there's a healthy ecosystem, such as through sediment and animal community monitoring. And we ensure that our fish are safe to eat through fish health and tissue bioaccumulation monitoring. Next slide. So to conduct monitoring, and this is really offshore monitoring, the ocean monitoring team uses many different instruments and equipment. So for example, it all really starts with our ocean monitoring vessel. It's the 58-foot long marine vessel called Narissa, as shown in the middle. And then if we're gonna go clockwise from there, we have instruments such as the Van Veen grab to collect ocean sediments. We have trawl nets to collect fish and invertebrates. We do hook and line fishing to collect sports fish. We have what's called a TRBM, or trawl resistant bottom mounts that protect and house our ADCP, which is our acoustic Doppler current profiler that we use to measure current direction. We have oceanographic moorings that take dissolved oxygen and pH measurements in the field for ocean acidification and hypoxia. And we have our CTD profiler, which stands for conductivity, temperature, and depth, that both measure different water quality parameters at discrete depths. Next slide. So now going into the core monitoring component. So this is our compliance monitoring. The ocean monitoring team performs quarterly sampling of sediment, as shown on the left. During the most recent years, sediment samples were collected for geochemistry analyses from 11 quarterly, 11 annual, and 35 summer quarter stations during the 2021-2022 program year. In addition, we collected sediment from 11 quarterly stations for whole sediment toxicity testing. So for sediments, we analyze for physical parameters, metals, and persistent pollutants. And once a year, we also conduct toxicity testing. The team also conducts sampling for water quality, as shown on the right, several times per month. They drop essentially a sampling device to measure different water quality parameters throughout the water column at all stations on this map. So what we find consistently from year to year is that sediment quality is good with no degradation by chemicals and absence of toxicity through toxicity testing of sediment. We also find that bacterial standards are consistently met at offshore and shoreline, and nutrient levels are typically non-detect. Next slide. So continue with our core monitoring elements. On the left, the team also collects sediment samples to look at the infauna communities, which are small critters that live in the mud at the bottom of the ocean. The mud from each station is pushed through a mesh to retain animals, and the animals are preserved and brought back to the lab where staff identify the species using microscopes. On the right, a few times per year, staff return to sea to conduct trawling and hook and line fishing to collect fish and larger critters from the seafloor. They're counted and identified to determine how their abundance and diversity is changing with time. And then what we consistently find is that infauna are similar at the outfall and reference sites. A reference site is the site we select with no influence from our ocean discharge. And then our macroinvertebrates and fishes are similar at the outfall and reference sites, and fish tissue contaminants are consistently below health advisory limits. Next slide. Now switching over to the regional monitoring, this is another important element of our ocean monitoring program, and we participate with other agencies on these regional monitoring efforts. And so I have a slide here of our staff retrieving one of our moorings. And I had mentioned that this mooring, it's an instrument that we deploy, and it sits at one of our stations, designated stations, and it collects different types of parameters such as dissolved oxygen and pH. And the idea behind these regional monitoring efforts is that we pull resources and assist with sampling efforts to get at larger questions and trends that we wouldn't be able to determine alone within just our core monitoring. And so some of the examples that are included in as part of these regional monitoring efforts include the Southern California BITE, regional water quality monitoring, as shown on the left. In the middle is a pteropod. It's a picture of a pteropod where we collect these as biological indicators to see if there's ocean acidification. And as I mentioned here, there's a slide here of our staff retrieving a mooring. Next slide. So in addition to core and regional monitoring, we conduct OCSAN-focused strategic process studies, or their SPS for short. They're essentially a group of studies that address crucial physical, chemical, and biological processes that are not addressed by earlier monitoring programs. So currently, many of our strategic process studies focus on projecting the impact of our discharge after final GWS expansion. I mentioned late last year that we achieved 100% recycling of our reclaimable flows. And because of that, we wanted to see if there's any impact of our ocean discharge in a receiving area. And so some of those studies include the use of modeling to track the fate of our discharge plume. We've used cell bioassays as a screening tool to evaluate impacts from changes in effluent and receiving water. We're currently conducting a study to establish a baseline of myofauna. They're sea animals that range from 63 to 500 micron in size, as shown in this picture, to compare against current and future changes. And we're characterizing microplastics through OCSAN's treatment processes, as well as investigating the fate and impact of microplastics to the receiving environment. Next slide. So every year, the ocean monitoring team, in collaboration with the lab and the environmental compliance team, we synthesize an annual report called the Marine Monitoring Report that captures and summarizes all the work we do to assess the quality of our highly treated effluent and to see if there are any impacts to the receiving environment, including our marine life. So I'm really happy to report each year that we continue to preserve and protect our environment, and we continue to do so into the future. And if you're interested in reading these annual reports, I have a link there. You just go to ocsan.gov and look for our annual reports, and you can read more about our programs and our results. I did want to kind of share some context behind the annual report cover picture on the left. This was our marine monitoring report that we published for fiscal year 2020-2021. It was right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It really just kind of illustrates the many challenges that we faced during that first year of the pandemic. Our team was out there monitoring our ocean, but you can see in the back, there's a huge cargo ship in the background. There were several of these out near our monitoring area during that time. These ships were essentially cargo ships that were anchored at one of the 10 anchorages, waiting to get into the Long Beach port, and they were just waiting out there due to COVID restrictions. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and get into our beach monitoring program, and this is really the focal point for this presentation. So to kind of give you a brief summary of our beach monitoring program, currently there are 4 Orange County public agencies that, including OCSAN, that partner to monitor Orange County's beaches by conducting bacterial water quality monitoring along 42 miles of open coastline and 72 miles of harbor and bay under various discharge permits requirements or statutory mandates. So this is this planning that really it took years in the making and went into effect in 2012. This plan essentially created a collaborative integrated regional monitoring program through enhanced partnerships with the 4 agencies who now currently sample ocean and bay waters for regulatory purposes. The idea behind this was that it would it would bring forth a more efficient and effective way to leverage limited monitoring resources and sampling results while increasing the current level of public health protection for recreational water users. And so you can see in this slide the list of 4 agencies that are part of the Orange County Regional Shoreline Cooperative Monitoring Program. It's a mouthful, which integrates for us, OCC, and our MPDS POTW permits for stormwater, such as OC Public Works. They have their MS4 permit that they have to satisfy, MS4 standing for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. There are other requirements, but from AB 411, this is Assembly Bill 411, which is essentially beach sanitation requirements. And then we also have the Rec 1 shoreline monitoring requirements to establish and maintain a level of coastal monitoring that provides an appropriate balance between regulatory compliance and public health protection. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit more about our beach monitoring program. So our beach monitoring program dates back to all the way back to 1958. This is obviously before the collaborative and integrative regional monitoring program that started in 2012. So we were collecting samples within our core monitoring area all the way back to 1958. And so you can see here, currently, we conduct beach sampling at 36 beach stations along approximately 21 miles of shoreline in the northern and central part of Orange County, from Seal Beach down to Crystal Cove. You see the pictures here on the top left. The one on the left is one of the historical pictures. I don't know how far it goes back. It looks like at least decades ago, where we have someone, one of our former beach samplers collecting a sample at one of our beach stations. And you have a more recent sample of our beach sampler collecting a sample. So things haven't changed. We're still out there early in the morning collecting samples to analyze for fecal indicator bacteria. Picture on the left, bottom left, is actually a picture of 2 of our beach sampling trucks. One is our primary beach sampling truck. The other one is a backup in case, if the primary breaks down or gets stuck in the sand. We have another staff go out, relieve that person, or we'll hand over that vehicle and relieve that person, and the second person will stay out there and hope to get unstuck. The reason why we have 2 beach sampling trucks out at this time was because during COVID, we had new staff come on board, but because of COVID restrictions, we had restrictions where we can only occupy a vehicle with 1 person. So we took both trucks out at that time to make sure that we can conduct that training. And on the right is a map of not just our beach sampling stations, but all our sampling stations, including our offshore. But I circled here in red our core and regional monitoring stations that include those 36 stations. Next slide. So for testings, it's essentially the indicator bacteria that we test for. We use standard methods as well as the EPA method to test for total coliforms, fecal coliforms, and enterococcus. The picture on the right is the traditional membrane filtration method, which I'm not going to go into, but I'm sure many of you are aware of the method. And the picture on the video on the bottom is some of our staff that are conducting the membrane filtration method. Actually, it looks like there's a picture there of our Kohler method that we use for our offshore monitoring. Okay, next slide. So after we collect samples, we bring them back for analysis through those 3 methods that I had mentioned. We report that data to our Orange County Healthcare Agency. And the Orange County Healthcare Agency will determine if there is a violation or there's a need for a posting that goes up at the beach. And so the standards that are used for these indicator bacteria are listed here. So for total coliforms, it's the single sample maximum is essentially it's based on a single result or a single sample. And for total coliforms, it's 10,000 colony forming units per 100 mil. There's also a 30-day geomean standard, which is 1,000 CFU per 100 mil. And so the same idea applies for fecal coliform, where there's a single sample maximum, where essentially if there's 400 colonies, if there are more than 400 colonies per 100 mil, then there will be a posting that goes up. And if it exceeds a 30-day geomean of 200 CFU per 100 mil, then there'll be a posting. And then for Enterococcus, those numbers are much lower, where single sample maximum is 104 CFU per 100 mil, and then the 30-day geomean is 35 CFU per 100 mil. Next slide. And so I mentioned those results that we produce, it gets reported to our local health agency, which is essentially responsible for issuing beach water quality advisories and closures. And so that data gets reported to the Orange County Healthcare Agency. And then based on the state bacterial standards, they'll determine if the beach is healthy or a notification needs to go up at that specific beach. The picture on the top, right on the top, is from a website called ocbeachinfo.com, where they have the most latest information on beach water quality in Orange County. And here you can see that essentially there are all green dots, meaning that all the stations are healthy. But if based on the results that we or one of our partner agencies produces, and it shows that there's an exceedance based on that single sample standard or that 30-day geomean, there are 3 different types of postings that can go up. And so the first posting here on the bottom left is essentially a closure. It means that there is a known sewage spill, and because of that, the beach is closed. The second type of notification is it's a posting due to an exceedance in one of those 3 standards. Typically, there will be a warning like this, a warning posting like this, where you can still swim at your own risk, but it's most likely due to a non-human source. So typically, it could be things due to like birds or runoff. And then a third type of posting is an advisory warning, as shown on the bottom right, where essentially almost a permanent posting will be up, where it interfaces, that beach will interface with a source such as like a creek, river, or a channel. Next slide. So one thing I did want to kind of mention is that every year, Heal the Bay produces an annual beach report card that uses numerous metrics to assign a letter grade for each beach in California. Orange County beaches did receive excellent grades in the most recent 2021-2022 Heal the Bay's beach report card. As shown on the table on the bottom left, both summer dry and winter dry seasons received excellent grades of A or B at 95% or more of the beaches, while during the wet weather, we tend to get, not lower grades, but it was pretty good this past year, where wet weather, 66% of the beaches received A or B grades. And as you know, during wet weather, because of that first flush, there'll tend to be kind of spikes in fecal indicator bacteria. And then as shown on the right, for the second year in a row, Orange County had the most beaches on the honor roll with a total of 19 beaches on the list. And so to make the honor roll, a beach will need to receive an A+ during all seasons, which includes summer dry, winter dry, and wet seasons. Next slide. So I did want to introduce you one of our best management practices, and this particular one is our dry weather urban runoff diversion program. And dry weather urban runoff is water that is generated by daily activities such as lawn irrigation, hosing down sidewalks and car washing. Dry weather urban runoff can pick up contaminants and other materials based on what the runoff flows over, and that can make its way to the beach and contribute to beach postings and closures. So if you were living in Orange County during the late 90s, you may recall that in the summer of 1999, Huntington Beach closure triggered an investigation, which ultimately it found that dry weather urban runoff flowing into the Pacific Ocean was one of the major contributors to shoreline contamination and high bacterial levels. So as a result, the Orange County Sanitation District began the dry weather urban runoff diversion program in 1999, designed to minimize adverse impacts on coastal beaches and public health, while maintaining the high quality of its primary function, which is essentially a collection, treatment, and disposal of wastewater. So by accepting dry weather urban runoff, OC San has helped reduce bacterial exceedances along Orange County's beaches, including Huntington Beach. And so as part of a regional best management practice to control urban runoff, OC San currently accepts dry weather urban runoff from 21 permitted diversions as shown in this map here, including 3 pending diversions where the permits are currently under review within our service area as shown in this map. So in general, OC San will accept up to 10 million gallons per day for free, and about 6.5 million gallons of that are subscribed through these 21 diversions. Next slide. So in addition to the core monitoring of our beaches through analysis of fecal indicated bacteria via memory filtration, I had mentioned that we have several regional monitoring programs that we participate in to address issues at the regional level. And one of those big regional monitoring efforts is the regional bite studies. So this regional bite study occurs every 5 years, and for the microbiology element, we have looked at the application of new technologies and methodologies at our beaches in Southern California, which spans from Ventura down to San Diego. And so this is a huge effort that's facilitated by SCWRP, the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project. And I believe it was mentioned that there are 90 entities that are currently participating in Bite 23. So it's a huge effort. So some of the examples I wanted to show you here are, for example, Bite 13. For Bite 13, we assess the comparability of results between qPCR and traditional culture methods for measuring specifically Enterococcus species at Southern California beaches. For Bite 18, I think during this time, EPA was just about to release the EPA method 1642 for colophage analysis. So we focused on evaluating the utility of that method in Southern California beach waters. And then for Bite 23, currently that work plan is still being fleshed out, but a couple of things that will most likely be included are things like differentiating molecular signals from live versus dead cells. We'll be assessing the extent and magnitude of human fecal contamination at our beaches. We'll be exploring other human-specific indicators such as crasphage. So there's a lot going on in a Bite 23 just for the microbiology element. Next slide. But I mentioned that what I had just presented on the last slide is just for the microbiology element, but really the Bite 23, it's a huge effort that includes everyone. And so here's a table summarizing the total level of contributions just from OC San for Bite 23 so far. You can see that there are a number of samples that will be collected for each of the elements, and then the number of samples that will be well, I should say the sample collection, and then the sample analyses that would be performed. And so although these numbers may be small, it's not really just a one-time sampling event, but there's going to be multiple sampling events that will range from weekly to quarterly over multiple years. And then also for each of these sample analyses, there may be multiple constituents or organisms that would be analyzed for each sample. So it's a huge effort that occurs over sometimes over a 5-year period. All right, next slide. So I think that's it. That's my summary of our ocean monitoring program. I hope it was informative, and I'll open up to questions.
Great. Thank you, Sam, for such an in-depth presentation about such a cool topic. We do have several questions already piling up, so this is going to be great. We observe high level of total coliforms in our beach monitoring results. Is there a method available to determine if the source of contamination is from wildlife or human activities?
Yes, so that is a really good question, and I think it's an ongoing discussion as to whether total coliforms should be included in monitoring, especially for beach monitoring. I can tell you that there are a lot of, I wouldn't say false positives, but there's a lot of contribution of total coliform from non-human source. As as a question was posed, it's not specific to just humans. It can come from any blooded, I should say warm-blooded animals, and actually total coliforms can come from plants as well. So it's not the best indicator, and so there is a kind of a movement towards possibly dropping total coliforms, and then just really focusing on fecal coliforms and enterococcus.
Oh, interesting. Does OC Sand have studies of invasive species introduced by ballast water from containers and foreign ships?
No, we don't. Yeah, we don't.
Does OC Sand also screen for harmful algal blooms, or is that the responsibility of another agency?
We are. Harmful algal blooms is definitely a big hot topic right now. And so that is being, harmful algal blooms is definitely being included in BITE 23. I believe we also looked at it at BITE 18. Things like pseudonystria and specifically domoic acid, that's a big one. So we've been looking at, I think BITE 18, the chemistry group looked at developing a method for domoic acid. So I know our scientist was involved in that. We're also looking at harmful algal blooms for BITE 23 to see where harmful algal blooms could be potentially occurring. I think there's some modeling efforts to see if they can potentially predict the occurrence of harmful algal blooms as well. So there's a lot of effort going on with HABs.
Sounds like a very big operation. How many laboratory specialists and samplers are involved?
So in our group, in our lab, we have, so the laboratory group is broken up where, I mentioned we have the analytical chemistry group, and hopefully this addresses the question appropriately, but in our analytical chemistry group, we have 13 staff members. In our general chemistry microbiology and sample group, we have currently 12 members. And in our ocean monitoring team, we have 11 staff members. So total, we have 43.5 staff. We have a half-timer, but that also includes our QA team and our kind of administrative team, our supervisors and myself.
Okay.
So they do a lot.
Yeah. When you have an exceedance on the beach monitoring, you'd mentioned posting, but do you also do accelerated monitoring?
Yes. So when there is an exceedance, what we will do is we'll obviously go back and resample, and so we'll go back out to the specific beach location, collect a sample, and then we'll retest only for that indicator where there was an exceedance. So typically, when we see an exceedance, at a minimum, we'll see an exceedance for enterococcus. And so, if we see an exceedance for enterococcus, then we'll perform enterococcus, testing for enterococcus again. But if we see an exceedance for all three indicators, then we'll perform testing for all three indicators. We obviously don't do any treatment, right? We're not going to throw bleach out at the beaches. So typically, the bacterial levels will go back down, by the next day. But if they do continue to exceed, then we'll go back out every day until those levels go back down.
I think this kind of follows up nicely. What kind of fast testing methods is being used for beach closure notices?
That's a good question. So we don't do any fast rapid testing here in Orange County Sanitation District. We have looked at I mentioned, I think it was a Byte 13, we looked at the efficacy of qPCR at our Southern California beaches. We did see some, we didn't really see the best correlation with qPCR and culture methods, although we did see some correlation at specific sites. I guess one of the things that we really kind of just drew with conclusion is that we may see some benefit with these rapid methods, but really it has to be site specific. And if you have a chronic problem at your beaches, we don't. For us right now, the culture methods are working well, and so we don't use any kind of rapid methods. We may use it for specific occasions, but for our routine beach monitoring, we don't.
Great. Will OC SAN have plans to test for microplastics?
Yes, we have a strategic process study where we are looking at microplastics through our treatment processes, as well as plans to look in our receiving environment. So there is a study underway. We also are working with SQUIRP on other projects, things like collection method, where we're looking at evaluating multiple collection methods. As you may know, really. You need to, ELAP obviously has an accredited method for microplastics now for drinking water. Also, there's also methods that are being worked on for some of the kind of dirty matrices, including wastewater. But I think ultimately you have to start with a good sample collection method. And so right now there's an effort underway to look at various collection methods for different matrices. So that's something that we're working on in partnership with SQUIRP.
How does OC SAN deal with biosolids? Do you have digesters at the plant?
We do. We have digesters, anaerobic digesters right now where we produce Class B biosolids. There are other projects underway to, meet Class A biosolids. We also have a project underway to look at food waste digestion. We're kind of providing a kind of a solution to some of the organic reduction that's required. I think there's some kind of state regulations that are underway to reduce organic waste. And so, we're trying to offer a solution by taking some of that food waste. And from what I hear, it's supposed to be like rocket fuel for anaerobic digesters. So that's projects underway as well. I think it's about seven years out. So there's a lot of stuff going on with digesters for sure.
What is the biggest challenge as the lab director of OC SAN?
The biggest challenge is honestly just making sure that we don't overload our team. There's a lot of stuff going on, and our team works hard every day. And really, I have a great team here. We have a great team. And so really, it's just the biggest challenge is really just kind of making sure that we don't overload our staff, because they'll just take it on and just do what we do. But I think as supervisors and managers, I think it's just kind of making sure that we're able to balance, being able to provide our services at the same time, just making sure that we're not overloading our staff.
For HAB testing, have you participated in any voluntary performance studies? And if yes, any lessons that you've learned that you can share?
I'm not sure what it means by, I guess maybe if you can elaborate on performance testing. Does that mean like a kind of accreditation like test to see how well like a method performs?
While we wait for that person to clarify, we can ask another question. What's the best advice that you have for younger lab professionals entering the lab industry?
So the best advice I think really is to, just learn as much as you can. I would say, I think Peter really stated well, invest in yourself, whether it's through education, trying to, gain as much experience as you can. One thing I kind of wish I did was while I was in school was to, kind of participate in internships. I think, really kind of focusing on academia is great, but as you're kind of going through grad school, and if your plans are to kind of a pivot from academia and go into like the government sector or into the private sector, I think internships is really key to kind of gaining that experience before transitioning. So I would say internships, just invest in yourself through education and just don't limit yourself. Just I would say it's okay to kind of start from the ground up. I think if you want to learn everything in the laboratory, it really kind of starts from sampling, and don't be afraid to learn sampling, to sample extraction, to instrumentation. It's a long process, but really it's rewarding.
So we're still waiting for Sergeet, if you have a second to clarify your question. Someone else asking, how long is an on-site assessment in such a large lab?
On-site assessment, I think typically it's about 3 days. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. I think this is a follow-up. It's talking about the interlab HAB proficiency study offered by Eurofins, like an ELISA kit.
Okay. I can't say that we participated in something like that. So yeah, sorry, I can't provide any context on that.
Okay. Let's see. Looking for any other questions to come in. And if not, I'll give people another couple seconds to type things in just to make sure we don't miss anyone. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sam. We really appreciate. Oh, one more. Okay, one more. Any advice for someone who is wanting to move from the bench to a manager?
So that's a good question. I think, some of the more common, response that you'll probably hear about is leadership, obviously kind of demonstrating that you have leadership. But really, I think the other part of this is really showing accountability and showing that you're responsible. I think it's, as a manager who is looking to, who recently hired several supervisors, one of the things I really needed to make sure that our supervisors have in terms of character is just responsibility and accountability. If I'm not confident that someone can get the work done, then it's going to be difficult to really kind of continue to move forward and manage not just your team, but to make sure that the supervisors can manage their team. So just accountability, being responsible, and just showing that you have leadership skills. And maybe, can I put a plug in, Jennifer? Because I talked about internships. We are going to have a couple of internships that are going to be coming up. So hopefully, keep an eye out if you're interested. There's going to be one in our ocean monitoring program and then one in our QA program. So be on the lookout if you're interested.
That's perfect. Awesome. And then final question that we've been posing to everyone. I think I missed Augustine though. Favorite sci-fi character, since I won't limit you to just Star Wars. So
favorite sci-fi character? Gosh. I want to say it would have to be, well, since we were talking about Star Wars, we just finished up watching Mandalorian, so I thought it was a great show. I have a lot of respect for a Mandalorian, so for now.
Well, that's perfect, because up next, I'm going to have Caitlin come and give us a preview on tomorrow, and I believe she has a little friend with her.
Okay. Grogu. Okay, see ya. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to everyone in our fabulous audience who's still with us. Today's presentations have exceeded expectations that were already very high. We hope you can join us tomorrow for one last day of ELAPCon. You won't want to miss the final countdown. We'll start the day off with a presentation from one of our TNI-2 early adopters, Kelvin Ewan of LA County Sanitation District, then move straight into a presentation from our very own Kate Hilty and Chris Hand. They will be filling you in on tips and tricks to help you implement TNI-2 with ease. From there, we'll head into presentations from each of our third-party assessors, who will cover topics like how to have a great on-site assessment, how to perform a root cause analysis and write a corrective action plan. We'll also get to learn about the most common TNI findings and the most common assessment findings.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for day 2 of ELAP Con. We are over halfway through our conference with a ton of awesome content still to come. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you back here tomorrow morning. Remember, there's a unique link for each day, which you can find on our conference website, and we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Make it so.